A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. I had never imagined that constructing a dollhouse would ignite such a simmering conflict between my heart and my conscience, but sometimes the lines between right and wrong blur in unexpected ways. For years, I had poured my evenings into crafting intricate projects, each requiring patience and skill. My latest endeavor was a dollhouse, a stunning replica of our own home, complete with miniature furniture I'd fashioned from scraps. I envisioned it as a delightful surprise for my niece, Lily, who was just beginning to discover the joy of imaginative play. When I finally unveiled it to my wife, Jenna, one warm Saturday afternoon, I expected her to share in my excitement. Instead, I sensed a hesitation in her eyes, a shadow of disappointment that tugged at my gut. To Jenna, this wasn't just a dollhouse, it was a reminder of the children we had been trying to have for over 3 years. It was a painful echo of hope that had turned into sorrow, the dollhouse becoming a silent witness to our unfulfilled dreams. After she walked away, I was left standing in the living room, the dollhouse perched on the table like an altar to my own conflicting emotions. I spent the next few days wrestling with how to navigate this delicate territory. Lily was such an innocent light in our lives, always brimming with energy and curiosity, her laughter a beautiful distraction from our struggles. I could easily envision her joy, radiant as she played with tiny families inhabiting the dollhouse I had designed with so much love. Yet, was it fair to give that dollhouse to her, now knowing it could unintentionally deepen the hurt in my wife? Each night, I tried to compartmentalize my feelings, but guilt would creep in each time I envisioned Lily's bright smile. Jenna and I had our discussions about starting a family, and although they were often laced with hope, they were equally filled with anxiety and uncertainty. The pain of loss was ever present, and I had never seen Jenna more vulnerable than when we talked about what it meant for our future. As the weekend neared, the veiled tension between us grew palpable. I would catch Jenna staring at the dollhouse with a mix of longing and regret, almost as if it had taken on a life of its own, weaving its way into the fabric of our unspoken struggles. Each time she looked away, I felt a pang of guilt, followed by a sudden urge to lock it away, to spare her feelings. But then I heard Lily's laughter echoing in my head, and I could almost picture her tiny hands carefully adorning the dollhouse with her imaginative touches. This created an inner conflict that kept me tossing and turning late into the nights. Finally, it came to a head at dinner one evening. We had both been quiet, lost in our thoughts, when I finally broke the silence. "What if I gave the dollhouse to Lily?" I proposed gently, gauging her reaction. It was like I had flipped a switch. Jenna's eyes snapped to me, fraught with an intensity I hadn't seen in days. "Is that really what you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, loaded with an incredulous sting. "Can it be both? Can it be a gift for Lily?
But also a reminder that we can still create happiness?"
I tried to explain, though each word felt heavier than the last, as if I were trying to lift the weight of our unfulfilled expectations with flimsy proposals. "No, but it means something different for me," Jenna replied, her voice breaking ever so slightly. There it was, the truth unveiled. It wasn't just about the dollhouse, it was about what it represented. I finally understood, it was a connection, a vision of familial joy. I watched the gravity of the moment settle between us like dust in a sunbeam. The more we talked, the more I realized that perhaps it wasn't merely an AITA scenario, it was about understanding, empathy, and navigating the tender landscape between love and loss. In the days that followed, I found myself standing before the dollhouse with a new perspective. I decided to give it to Lily but framed it differently. I crafted a small card to attach, explaining how it was built with love that could be shared, allowing Jenna to be part of that joy, yet giving me the strength to watch her smile grow brighter as our niece played. When I finally presented it to Lily, the sheer delight in her eyes made the choice worthwhile. Yet in the back of my mind, I knew that this dollhouse would always stand as a subtle reminder of our journey. It turned out that many months later, as I gifted another project to our niece, I was surprised by a simple email that Jenna sent after one of her late-night musings. "Remember that dollhouse? Lily still plays with it and loves how it looks just like our house," she wrote. "Maybe we can make that dollhouse a reality someday." And in that moment, the ache we had lived with seemed a little less heavy. The illusion had transformed into a dream, reminding us both that love, in all its forms, was something still worth building. The flickering light of the candles danced on the walls of our living room as I sat back in my chair, reminiscing about the work I had poured into that dollhouse. Each miniature detail represented not just a collection of wood and paint, but the fragments of our life together, the cozy living room with its tiny couch and absurdly intricate wallpaper that Jenna had picked out, Or the kitchen with its miniature utensils that reminded me of the countless evenings we'd spent cooking side by side. It was here, in this quiet space, that I began to value those memories even more as a reflection of the love we had built amidst the uncertainty of our earlier years, a true testament to resilience. As I sipped my tea, I thought about that email. Hearing that Lily, my niece, enjoyed the dollhouse so much reignited a flicker of warmth in my chest. It felt incredible to know that the labor of love and creativity had not only honored mine and Jenna's story but had also bonded Lily with the very essence of our lives. She was transforming those memories into her own adventures. It was a bridge connecting the past and the present, reminding us that happiness could still bloom amid the challenges. Yet, as night settled in and the stars blinked into existence outside, the familiar sensation of guilt drifted back in, like an unwelcome guest at my door. Did I make the right decision by giving the dollhouse to Jenna and not to Lily? Though initially, it felt right to honor my wife's role in my life and the sacrifices she had made, I couldn't help but feel that perhaps I'd robbed Lily of something special. Did I inadvertently create a schism between their relationship, where my decision perhaps felt like an unintentional rejection of her place in my life? Jenna, perceptive as always, sensed my unease. She slipped onto the couch beside me, her warm presence shifting the air to a more comforting space. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Her voice was laced with a gentle empathy that made it easy to confide in her. The steady rhythm of my heartbeat seemed to sync with the flickering light of the candles as I let out a heavy sigh. "I've just been thinking about the dollhouse," I admitted, my voice almost a whisper against the backdrop of the softly crackling flames. "I hope I didn't make the wrong choice by not giving it to Lily." Jenna smiled knowingly and took my hand, intertwining her fingers with mine. "You gave her something even more valuable than the dollhouse," she replied softly. "You gave her the example of building a life filled with love and creativity. You showed her that our family can create and share beauty, and that she can dream of building something of her own one day too." Her words washed over me like the gentle embrace of a wave, reassuring me that our decision was not only justifiable but also imbued with a depth of understanding that transcended simple material gifts. It was an investiture, no longer a mere dollhouse, but a symbol of our shared journey, intertwined with the hopes we had for our own family as well. The next morning struck with the warmth of a new promise, and I found myself compelled to reach out to Jenna again. It was time we brought something to life that would encompass our love and hopes for the future, a project that could merge my skills and our dreams, into something tangible. We bounced ideas back and forth across the breakfast table, laughter slipping out between bites of toast, imagining a new dollhouse, this one a miniature embodiment of everything we envisioned for Lily, but with our fingerprints all over it. Weeks sped by, and slowly but surely, as if we were crafting our story one step at a time, the dollhouse began to take shape. "What if we include a tiny version of the tree in our yard?" I suggested during one evening of construction, the air heavy with the scent of sawdust and varnish. Jenna leaned closer, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm as she devised clever ways to incorporate even more details. Every piece of wood we selected, every color we mixed, felt like an affirmation of our love, a quiet promise that the foundation of the dollhouse echoed our values. On the day we finished, we stood side by side, letting the weight of our work seep in as we admired the end result. The miniature dwelling glowed warmly in the light of the setting sun, and it suddenly struck me that we hadn't just crafted a dollhouse, we had built a tangible connection that bridged the love we shared with Lily. We decided to keep it a surprise, planning to unveil it at our next family gathering, where we would finally present a reflection of our journey to the next generation. As I lay in bed that night, my heart felt unburdened at last. The ache I had once felt had turned into something soft and bright, filled with the knowledge that love, especially when shared and woven into the lives of those we cherish, expands beyond what we originally envisioned. In its own unique way, it branches out, like a tree that steadily bears fruit as it grows, and I knew, just as the ideal dollhouse stood as proof of our journey, so, too, did our story continue to blossom with each passing day. Update: several weeks later, after that surprise unveiling filled with delight and tears of joy, Jenna and I received a touching message from Lily. "Thank you for the cozy dollhouse. It makes me so happy. I hope we can always build amazing things together." It reminded us that sometimes, the act of creation is as important as the creations themselves, and the love we pour into these projects only fosters deeper connections with those who matter most. The days that followed were filled with a gentle warmth that radiated from both our home and our hearts, an unspoken promise that we were stepping into a new chapter of our lives together. Jenna, ever the thoughtful one, began leaving little surprises around the house, an unexpected note tucked into my lunch, a small bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen counter in the morning. It was her way of reminding me that while the past had its weight, the present could still be woven from joy and love. One weekend, we decided to take a trip to an artist's market down near the waterfront. I remember the vibrant colors of handmade pottery and the sounds of laughter drifting through the air as we wandered together, hand in hand. We stumbled upon a stall filled with little wooden figurines, each one hand-carved and painted with such care that they seemed to squeeze their way into your heart. Jenna picked up a small family set, a father, a mother, and 2 children. "They remind me of us," she said, a soft smile dancing on her lips. It was true, they felt like tiny echoes of our hopes and dreams for the future. We purchased them on a whim, and as we carried them back to the car, I found myself struck by the thought that every piece we gathered was another thread in the tapestry we were weaving together. The months slipped by in a blissful blur, and each week, Lily would fill our home with her laughter as she came over to play. The dollhouse had become her sanctuary, and Jenna and I often found her tucked away, deep in imaginary worlds she created with her tiny figurines. I caught glimpses of their adventures, a family picnic with the little wooden parents and their even smaller children, elaborate tea parties hosted by the family of dolls, and sometimes even the family making a trip to the beach in another imaginative play. It was enchanting to witness, like watching a painter fill the empty canvas of childhood's imagination. There was a day I returned home after a long week at work, feeling the weight of the world pressing on my shoulders. As I entered the house, I was greeted by the soft sounds of laughter echoing from the living room. I made my way there, and nothing could prepare me for the scene that unfolded. There was Jenna, seated on the floor, surrounded by colored paper, scissors, and remnants of drawings. And there was Lily, her eyes bright, fully immersed in crafting furniture for the dollhouse they had decided needed upgrades. The sight sent a wave of warmth through me. I stood there for a moment, quietly observing, allowing the tranquility of the moment to wash over me, a testament to the connections being nurtured in our little home. As that evening drew to a close, I couldn't help but think about the journey we had taken, the transitions, the trials, and ultimately, the love that had stitched us back together. With Lily beside her, Jenna looked up and smiled at me. "You have to see what we've made." In that moment, the burdens I had carried felt lighter, and the future stretched before us like an open road. Perhaps the dollhouse was not merely a beautiful construction, but rather a symbol of resilience and creativity flourishing between generations. That night, we gathered around the dining table, sharing laughter and stories, Lily's wide eyes lighting up as she recounted the adventures of her dolls. She was always the mischievous little sister in her tales, and we hung on her every word, savoring the sweetness of her imagination. Reflection on that whirlwind of emotions led me to realize, love, like creativity, is built with both care and time, and sometimes the best creations aren't the ones we see before us, but the memories we craft and the bonds we strengthen. As I watched Jenna and Lily hunched over their paper crafts, I understood that every moment we spent building something together, be it in the form of a dollhouse or in the quiet moments of everyday life, was a precious thread in the rich tapestry of our existence. And as the sun dipped gently below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across our home, I whispered a silent promise to myself, to always build, to always share, and to never forget the courage it took to embrace love in all its beautiful, messy forms. I never thought I would find myself in a situation that led me to question my own morals over something as simple as a dog and a few disgruntled neighbors, but life has a curious way of throwing challenges our way when we least expect them. My name is Sam, and I've lived in the same cozy house at the end of Maplewood Street for just over 5 years. It had always been a peaceful neighborhood, one where the biggest concern was whether Miss Thompson's hydrangeas would bloom in time for her garden party, rather than petty squabbles or disputes. My trusty companion, Bella, a golden retriever with an insatiable curiosity, quickly became a favorite amongst the neighbors. She possessed an innate ability to brighten the bleakest of days, her joy was infectious, and her gentle nature made her an ideal friend not just to me but to everyone around. However, a recent encounter had left me wrestling with doubt. Had I crossed a line by allowing Bella to handle things her way? One evening, after a long day at work where the creaking of office chairs and flickering fluorescent lights had drained my energy, I decided to take Bella out for her usual evening run in the backyard. The sky had started to shift into softer shades of pink and orange, and the chirping of crickets began to fill the air, creating the perfect setting for a little relaxation. As I sat on the porch, watching Bella chase her tennis ball, I noticed our neighbors, the Johnsons, arguing animatedly across the street. They had been embroiled in a feud over their new fence, which was apparently too close to the property line. I had overheard snippets of it during my outdoor mornings but chose to remain uninvolved. Those moments of rivalry never seemed to disrupt the usual tranquility of our community, until this particular night. Suddenly, Bella, intrigued by the commotion, stopped mid-chase, her ears perked up, and in a heartbeat, she dashed towards the Johnsons, barking excitedly as she approached. I could see that her spirited barks caught the attention of both the Johnsons and the other family involved in the argument. For a moment, I thought of calling her back. She could either brighten the situation or distract them further. But then another bark escaped her lips, one that projected confidence, asserting her presence as if she held the authority of a canine peacekeeper. Instead of instinctively recalling Bella, I hesitated, watching the scene unfold from the safety of my porch, wondering if she's playfully trying to referee the situation. And just like that, things took an unexpected turn. The Johnsons turned their frustrated expressions into amused ones, laughter emerging between their vehemence as they observed my dog prancing confidently around them, seemingly oblivious to their spats. They began to lower their voices, almost whispering as Bella circled them, trying to engage with each person. For a fleeting moment, it felt like an amusing break, a moment of levity that cut through the tension. However, the spell was short-lived. Bella, with a boundless enthusiasm, ran back towards me, leaping like an eager puppy, proud of her tiny intervention. I felt a rush of warmth and pride swell in my chest. Perhaps she had achieved something with her playful antics. But as I turned my gaze back to the Johnsons, I noticed their expressions had mutated. Now they glared at me. "Nice dog you got there," one of them shouted, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Maybe next time, you should control her better." I could feel my heart sink, the weight of their disappointment echoing in the air. Suddenly, I felt the eyes of everyone in the neighborhood upon me, a million unspoken questions lingering in the cool evening breeze. Had I really done something worth faulting? Should I have acted differently? Inside, I started an internal debate, wondering if perhaps I was indeed the instigator of my neighborly woes. That evening, while Bella rested by my feet, I found myself scrolling through community chat groups, curiosity tugging at my conscience. Other residents had chimed in, seemingly discussing the need to reprimand Bella, a dog not only meant to protect but also to be a disruptor of harmony. I felt trapped in a moral maze, conflicting thoughts swirling in my mind. Days passed with a heavy silence between me and the Johnsons. I apologized in hushed tones whenever I encountered them, but their retorts were chilly and distant. I can't describe the unease I felt each time Bella barked, looking up at me with her bright eyes, as if asking me to send her after the neighbors once more. Eventually, my anxiety morphed into anger, not towards the Johnsons but at myself. I had wanted to keep the peace, yet now I was left feeling like a villain in my own home, culled by a series of decisions made out of impulse rather than malice. I couldn't shake off the question that lingered inside my mind: am I the asshole for not recalling my dog when she chased my neighbors off my property? In the days that followed, I grew more reflective. I realized how easy it was to get caught up in the perceptions of others, leading me to slowly let go of my guilt. Bella was innocent in all this, an unwitting participant in a human conflict that had spiraled beyond playful barks. It dawned on me that I wasn't just protecting her by allowing her to chase off the Johnsons, I was allowing her to be herself, vibrant and carefree. As the summer skies grew darker, I made a decision: I would invite the Johnsons over for a barbecue, an opportunity to mend the rift that had caused an unwelcoming chill in our neighborhood. Stepping outside, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me, but I steadied my breath and carried on. The smell of grilled burgers began to fill the air, and as the Johnsons tentatively approached our doorstep with initial reservations, all that slowly began to shift. The encounter ended with laughter, Bella stealing the spotlight as she playfully wooed every guest for scraps. Finally, as the sun set, painting the sky with hues of lavender and indigo, we gathered around the fire pit, quietly acknowledging that conflict is part of living in close proximity. Reflecting on that night under the stars, I found a sense of peace, an understanding that while we may err in our judgment, it's how we come together afterward that truly matters. My heart swelled with relief as I realized that I hadn't harmed my neighbors. Instead, I had enabled a chance for connections to deepen. And as for Bella? She's still a free spirit, and I wouldn't want her any other way. Update: a week after the barbecue, I received a message from the Johnsons over the neighborhood chat group, thanking me for an enjoyable evening. They recognized their own part in the initial escalation and shared stories of their own pets that offered a glimpse into their world. It turns out, all it took was a little ceremony of shared laughter and the promise of goodwill to wipe the slate clean and embark on a more harmonious chapter for Maplewood Street. My heart swells with hope and understanding that sometimes, all it takes is a playful dog to remind us of the bonds that can uplift our community. As I sat on my porch that evening, the sun dipping low beyond the horizon and casting golden hues over Maplewood Street, I reflected on how transformative the past few days had been. Bella, my spirited golden retriever, lay by my feet, her gentle breathing a soothing rhythm against the chirping of crickets that began to fill the air. Each time I glanced down at her soft, golden fur, I felt a swell of gratitude, not just for her loyal companionship, but for the unexpected bridge she had built between my neighbors and me. The Johnsons, with their youthful laughter and easygoing nature, had become a source of warmth in my life that I hadn't anticipated. When I first moved to this suburb, I was hopeful yet slightly reticent about engaging with my neighbors. After living in a busy city for years, where the sounds of traffic drowned out the feeble attempts at community greetings, I was unaccustomed to the warmth that now blossomed around me. Having lived the last few years in solitude, the hum of community life felt both refreshing and intimidating. At the beginning of my stay in Maplewood, I remained an observer, smiling at neighbors from a distance, offering polite waves but never venturing further. But Bella's exuberance had a knack for cutting through my apprehension. She would trot up to anyone with uncontainable excitement, her tail wagging furiously, urging me to engage. It was through her antics that I began to learn the names of the folks who lived nearby and shared snippets of their lives. That fateful day when Bella decided to chase off those obnoxious trespassers had initially left me feeling anxious, fearing the potential backlash and the strain on our freshly budding relationships. Yet, the message from the Johnsons had shifted everything. The evening had unfolded so beautifully, a mosaic of laughter and stories unveiling our shared experiences. The gentle banter about our pets broke down walls that I had previously thought were impenetrable. It marked the day my neighbors invited me into their circle, emphasizing that we were all human, susceptible to misunderstandings and hesitant connections. As twilight settled in, I thought about how far I had come, and in a subtle way, it dawned on me that life in Maplewood had started to feel like home. With each shared moment over the preceding weekend, the lines between neighbors faded, replaced by the understanding that we were all just trying to navigate this chaotic, beautiful tapestry called life. I smiled to myself, recalling how Bella had innocently prompted our little gathering, a series of unforeseen events all triggered by her instinct to protect, a fierce loyalty accompanied by boundless joy, the very essence of what made dogs so remarkable. Curiously, as the last light of day melted away, I found myself drafting a message in my mind to post later in the neighborhood chat. Something simple yet heartfelt. Perhaps I would propose a summer barbecue, nothing fancy, just some burgers and laughter, a casual gathering where we could continue to weave our lives together. My fingers itched to get the words down, eager to strike while the iron was hot and maintain the warmth that had ignited between us. Yes, I thought, this includes all of the neighbors, everyone from the retirees down the street to the young families who had recently moved in. They all deserved a chance to feel that sense of camaraderie that had begun to envelop Maplewood Street, all sparked by a dog's undeniable spirit. As I rose to prepare a late dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that a new chapter was unfolding for our little corner of the world. The lesson I had gleaned over the last few days was profound. It's extraordinary how a bit of laughter, understanding, and goodwill could shape lives and communities peacefully. I knew within me that this was only the beginning, a gentle nudge towards deeper connections and lasting friendships, all thanks to the loud bark of my beloved dog who believed that every heart could be won over with a wagging tail and a little unfiltered enthusiasm. And as I stepped inside, Bella stood up in a stretch, nuzzling against my leg as if to say, "Let's get to work on building that community, Mom." The ceaseless love we give and receive simply overlaps so effortlessly. In that moment, I felt ready for whatever adventures lay ahead, knowing Bella and I would tackle them together. With Bella's warm presence grounding me, I felt an undeniable shift in the air, one that flowed through the walls of our home and into the very fabric of Maplewood Street. It was invigorating to think that we could play a role in transforming our neighborhood, where once there was tension, there could now be laughter, forgiveness, and camaraderie. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. I pondered how to harness this newfound energy. With the holiday season approaching, a neighborhood block party began to form in my mind, a chance to weave everyone together, even more so than that initial gathering at my house. I quickly created a shared document and dropped it into the neighborhood chat. To my delight, responses flooded in with ideas for food, games, and festive decorations. The more the Johnsons and their 2 kids offered up their favorite recipes, the more others contributed their own delicious dishes. It felt like we were collectively crafting a feast that would tell the story of Maplewood Street, encompassing all of our backgrounds and cultures, with Bella's joyful spirit leading the way. As preparations progressed, Bella became my little assistant. She accompanied me on trips to the local farmers market, where we picked up fresh fruits and vegetables, sniffing around stalls and earning a few head pats from smiling vendors. Each delivery and every shopping trip felt like a micro-venture, her excitement infectious as onlookers marveled at the boundless energy radiating from my ever-enthusiastic companion. Our conversations at home shifted too. No longer were the evenings filled with dull chatter about mundane tasks. Instead, we reveled in brainstorming creative ideas for the party decorations, mixing ideas of string lights with a DIY photo booth featuring props inspired by the quirky personalities of our neighbors. It was a charming banter with Bella by my side, her tail thumping against the floor as if she were adding her own approval to each suggestion. Then came the big day of the block party. Warm sunlight spilled across the street as laughter and hustle filled the once empty spaces. Everyone had pitched in, and our front yard stood transformed into a gathering place adorned with twinkling lights and vibrant banners. Bella darted through the clusters of people, eager to greet everyone, her playful spirit breaking the ice as children giggled and adults shared stories over plates filled with food. It felt as if we had unearthed hidden gems in our neighbors. The taciturn Mr. Harris revealed himself to be a fantastic storyteller, regaling us with tales of his youth, while Mrs. Jenkins brought out an incredible chocolate cake that seemed to disappear within minutes. Throughout that magical afternoon, I found myself reflecting on how just a month ago, stress and uncertainty hung over our neighborhood like a dark cloud, and now, the air was thick with camaraderie and connection. Bella would chase after the kids, barking delightedly as they tossed a frisbee, her playful barks mixing harmoniously with their laughter. Occasionally, one of the little ones would tumble into one of the neighboring groups, and the adults would rush to comfort them, smiles on their faces still. I realized Bella was weaving her charm, encouraging openness, kindness, and unguarded laughter among us all. As dusk approached, an impromptu circle formed around a fire pit, illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns hanging from above. The warmth of the flames complemented the connectedness that blossomed around me, forging bonds between families and thoughts of future gatherings already swirling in the air. By the time the last glow of the sun dipped behind the horizon, I caught sight of Bella nestled comfortably in my lap as we wrapped up the evening, her breath deep in content. A gentle peace enveloped me. It dawned on me that community is born from simple gestures. It is about being present for each other and willingly sharing our lives. Who would have thought that one chaotic chase, followed by a knock on all our hearts, would lead us here? With every heartfelt joke exchanged and every food sample shared, I felt the barriers that had once distanced us crumble away to reveal a welcoming embrace of unity. Perhaps Bella was right all along. With a wagging tail and a heart open to connection, even the most fragmented of communities can truly come together. As I tucked Bella in for the night and settled onto the couch, I opened my phone only to find another message from the neighborhood group, this one a suggestion for a weekly potluck. Reading their words made my heart swell again. With the promise of next week already on the horizon, I realized Bella had sparked not just a party, but a movement, a shift in the hearts of those around us. As I drifted off to sleep, wrapped in the warmth of that community spirit, I felt an unwavering optimism for the future take root within me, certain that together with Bella, we would navigate whatever adventures awaited us. It started as a typical Tuesday morning for me, the usual gray light filtering through the half-drawn curtains and the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. I shuffled into the dim kitchen, coffee brewing, thoughts racing ahead of me like they often do. I was just 2 weeks into my new job as a healthcare data analyst, and despite the monotonous tasks, I found myself strangely excited, like this was my first little step into a big, adult world. I had been vying for this position ever since I graduated, earning my degree with the hopes of making a real impact in the world of health services. My enthusiasm, however, took a strange twist when I received a call from my boss that day. He told me there had been a mix-up with patient records at a nearby clinic and that I would need to come in at the end of the day to help fix it. As someone who had always valued personal privacy and the importance of confidentiality, I was unsettled. The notion of accessing sensitive patient files made me shiver, but I shook off the discomfort, reminding myself this was part of my job. Fast forward to the evening, and I entered the clinic, feeling a knot in my stomach. The fluorescent lights above buzzed ominously as I was introduced to the IT team and pointed toward a small room cluttered with outdated computers. That's when I encountered her, Melissa, a nurse who seemed to embody calm in the storm of disarray surrounding us. As we sat together trying to untangle the mess, I tried to keep things lighthearted, joking about the nature of paperwork and technology, but she quickly quieted. "Just remember, HIPAA violations are serious, she said, her voice low and slightly unsteady. That warning took root in my mind, not because I was making any potential mistake but because I sensed something deeper in her tone, a burden she carried. I pressed her about it gently. You seem stressed, Melissa. Is there something I should know? She sighed, glancing at the door. It's not about the patients who've already seen their records. It's about a new patient. You won't believe what happened. I felt a chill run through me as she recounted the tale. A patient, a woman named Sarah, had shown up mysteriously at the clinic requesting her records but had no identity. Melissa said Sarah wore odd clothing, spoke in riddles, and had an unsettling gaze that left the staff feeling watched. I could almost see the tension in her shoulders lighten as she spoke, a shared fear between us. It turned the mundane task of analyzing data into something almost mystical. Hours passed, and we were deep into a discussion of privacy, ethics, and the essence of patient identity when a sharp knock on the door jolted me upright. A man, disheveled and panting, burst in. You found her, right? You have to find her, he yelled. The room fell silent before I collected my thoughts. Confusion swirled around us. Melissa ushered him outside, but I could hear a harried discussion happening just beyond the walls. It felt like an eruption that I was not meant to witness. When they returned, tension wound tighter than a coiled spring. The man explained, Sarah is not who she says she is. She doesn't have a history in our files. It's like she's a ghost. He looked feverish, as though he had been chasing shadows. My heart raced. Was the woman we were trying to help someone trapped in a web of secrets? Or was she a danger, cloaked in anonymity? I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me, but curiosity tugged at my senses too. What does she want? I finally asked. The man's eyes darted, fear shadowing his breath. She wants answers. She thinks someone is after her. We were thrown into chaos. As Melissa and I resumed our tasks, I could feel my pulse quicken at every intimate detail. Data entries felt like interrogations as I plotted course after course through our systems, trying to piece together the answers to the enigma concealed within our sterile walls. The weight of records heavier than I'd anticipated hung over me. I replayed our conversation about HIPAA over and over, ensuring I was not crossing lines I didn't intend to cross, while my mind tangled with each unexplained piece of information. It became an obsession. How could a woman simply not exist? As the sun fell further, shadows began to stretch along the walls, the clinic growing quieter. Eventually, Melissa and I navigated deeper into the records, sensing a shift of urgency as we worked to uncover the truth. When we finally hit pay dirt, an old record buried so deep that no one had bothered to check, it felt like winning a race against the clock. Her name popped up alongside a series of previous appointments and a disconcerting note that detailed an anomalous transfer between facilities. Melissa smiled with relief, but I couldn't shake the discomfort settling over me. I expected every moment to slip into the realm of horror, fearing it might spiral out of control. As we walked the records to our supervisor, I felt a strange pull back toward Sarah, like she was a part of me now. What came next was surprising. Melissa and I both had to face frustrating bureaucracy and laws, trying to make sense of Sarah's identity, the paperwork spinning us around in knots of red tape. Each phone call became a trial, testing the limits of propriety and patience until I was left wondering if we would ever resolve the chaos that had enveloped us. As the clock struck midnight, a decision had to be made, to keep looking and risk breaking rules or accept what we discovered and move on. Taking a breath, I opted for honesty. We approached our supervisor and bared the whole situation, feeling the weight of truth lifting us slightly. What followed were some tense moments I will never forget. My heart raced as the supervisor scrutinized our findings, and I held my breath, praying we hadn't ventured too far. In that moment of clarity, I understood the gravity of our roles, the essence of humanity fused into every record, and how vital it was to respect these lives woven together through the healthcare system. As for Sarah, the answer came swiftly. The right personnel followed up, though I never learned what fate awaited her. I left the clinic that night exhausted yet relieved, acutely aware that the thrill of ethereal mystery and the deeply rooted seriousness of caring for patient identity often clash in the world of healthcare. Months passed after that fateful evening, and the experience began to fade into a soft recollection, just another tale tucked into my mind, woven among the many threads of my career. Then, one quiet Sunday afternoon, I received a familiar message. It was Melissa. Hey, it read, you won't believe what I've just found out about Sarah. Curiosity surged through me, and as I read, I couldn't help but wonder if I hadn't just become part of the story of someone who had carved their existence between identities. Just like that, I realized, Sometimes those we think are lost may hold secrets worth keeping, and our paths cross not by mere chance, but by a shared understanding of who we are beneath the masks we wear. And so I relayed back, "Tell me everything." Melissa's response came swiftly, like a whisper caught on the wind, full of urgency and intrigue. "I was going through some old social media posts, and it appears Sarah's been leading a double life. Did you know she used to work in a psychiatric hospital? She posted about her experiences under a pseudonym, and there are some pretty intense revelations in there. You should see the comments she gets, people sharing their struggles, their fears, and tying them into her stories in ways that are surprisingly insightful." A chill ran through me. I had known Sarah only as the soft-spoken woman with a penchant for vintage books and herbal teas, never as someone who had grappled with the complexities of mental health in a professional setting. "Do you think she's still in touch with anyone from there?" I texted, my mind racing with a river of thoughts. Would knowing more about her spark some deeper connection? Or was this merely stumbling onto territory better left alone? Melissa replied in a way that made me think she had kicked her own thoughts around, too. "Well, I didn't dig that deep, but she mentioned a case in one of her posts. It was cryptically fascinating. You could check if any of her old colleagues are still around." The notion struck me hard. What if this case was pivotal, not only to Sarah's past but perhaps intertwined with her reasons for stepping back from society? Instinctively, I felt a wave of empathy wash over me mixed with a hint of dread. I couldn't help but picture Sarah, clocking in day after day, carrying the weight of another person's pain, while she herself might have been drowning in her own struggles. The next day was a haze of mixed emotions, curiosity mixed with caution. Somewhere within me, a voice cautioned against delving too deep, reminding me of my role as the friend of the storyteller, not the investigator. But I felt that I couldn't just let this mystery slip through my fingers. Before I knew it, I began my search, tracking down various forums where ex-employees shared their experiences. Each thread unraveled new layers, pieces of a puzzle that felt achingly familiar. Eventually, I stumbled across a name that stood out, Dr. Hargrove, Sarah's former supervisor. The reviews of her were a mix of reverence and caution, as people praised her for her intuition but also warned of her unwavering intensity. Feeling daring, I reached out to Dr. Hargrove via LinkedIn, but the message sat unanswered for weeks as I tried to balance my fascination with an uneasy sense that I was intruding on something far more personal than I could understand. Then, almost unexpectedly, the notification popped up, a quick blip that sent adrenaline coursing through me as I read Dr. Hargrove's reply. "Let's discuss. How did you come to know Sarah?" I paused, contemplating how to respond, businesslike, or friendly and casual, but in the end, emotion tugged at me. I filled my response with the truth, how Sarah had become dear to me over our conversations, artfully circumventing the eerie nature of my inquiry. Soon, we arranged a call. As we spoke, Dr. Hargrove shared fragmented tales of Sarah's time in the ward, illuminating flashes of bravery amidst darker times, illuminating how she had been a fierce advocate for her patients' rights. It felt like I was sitting on a springboard, ready to leap into the unknown depths of Sarah's past, and yet I could hardly breathe as she detailed an incident with a patient that almost garnished Sarah both admiration and ire within the hospital community. She pushed boundaries in ways that rattled some of the staff, the doctor described, her voice steady yet tinged with endearment. She believed in radical empathy, often becoming too emotionally involved in her cases. It led to a very critical incident that forced her to reevaluate her place in the world. My heart raced at the weight of her words. I realized that Sarah held stories that might shatter what I thought I knew of her. They were pieces of her soul woven into those moments, and whether she shared them freely or kept them locked away, they remained an inseparable part of her journey. As the call ended, a lingering question hung in the air. Was this knowledge something I should reveal to her, or would it expose vulnerabilities that Sarah had worked hard to conceal? In the following days, my heart grew heavier, crafting narratives in my mind where revealing this truth brought only pain. One night, unable to sleep, I took the plunge. I texted her, my fingers trembling over the screen. "Hey, can we talk? I found out some things about your past." Silence enveloped the air, thick and awkward as I stared at my phone, half hoping for a reply but equally dreading it. When her response finally came, it read simply, "About what?" My pulse quickened. She had a right to know that her reflections had inspired earthquakes in someone else's life. I told her everything, all at once, my heart racing, projecting my excitement while fearing the abrupt end of our connection. It was futile to deny, she was a storyteller in every sense. But Sarah's reply was slower this time, each dot cueing a new pang of anxiety within me. The chat fizzled out, leaving a stuttered beat of anticipation hanging thick in the air. With each passing minute, I replayed every detail, how brave she had been, how compassionate her words were, yet I feared for the memories that the shadows carved into her spirit, one she may not wish to confront. When she finally typed, I didn't think anyone would ever ask me about that. It has been a while. I felt a tidal wave of relief rush through me. I stepped carefully, acknowledging the fragility housed in her revelation while also wanting to encourage her to share more. We spent hours on the phone after that, her words weaving a tapestry of pain and hope in ways I had never imagined before. I finally grasped the depth of her character. She wasn't lost between the stories and identities, she was the sum of them, an intricate web of experiences that continued to shape her. When our call finished, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, longing to draw her out of the shell that had quietly encased her. It became evident, sometimes, behind the closed doors of old memories, lies a path to healing, a beckoning for both of us to remind ourselves who we were beyond the masks we created. As the days turned into weeks, we exchanged messages more freely now, her guarded tone melting into something friendly and real. And I wondered, in passing, about what stories I too held tightly behind my own facade, cherished fragments that might intertwine with hers. Perhaps we both shared the weight of pasts and secrets, each of us learning to navigate our truths together, a quiet understanding that some journeys are meant to be shared. And so, in this tangled dance of revelations, Melissa's message came to echo within me. Sometimes those we think are lost hold secrets worth keeping, and who knows? Perhaps in every hidden truth lies the potential for connection greater than we could ever envision. Melissa's response was instant, a flurry of text that felt both electric and weighty. "You know Sarah, right? She worked at that clinic a few months back, the one where you used to go for therapy?" I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see me. The memories of that clinic were still vivid, the sterile smell of antiseptic mingling with the faint scent of lavender that the receptionist sprinkled in the air. Sarah had been warm, a gentle presence amidst the cold sterility of mental health care. "Well," Melissa continued, "she's been let go. They said it was for violating protocol, but there's more to it." At that moment, curiosity twisted in my gut. Sarah had always seemed so careful, so attuned to the patient's needs. What did she do? I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly as I awaited Melissa's reply. "I ran into her at the bar a week ago," Melissa wrote slowly, "and she was different. More erratic. She mentioned something about patient files, but she didn't elaborate. I think she might have been researching something she shouldn't have. And you know what's wild? She was asking about you." My heart skipped a beat. Why would Sarah be looking into me? Was she worried, or was it something deeper? The butterflies in my stomach fluttered violently as I recalled my last session with Sarah. She'd seemed concerned when I mentioned dreams that felt too real and haunting moments that clung to me like shadows. Was my own world now somehow threading into Sarah's unraveling tale? I let the questions linger as I replied, "What do you mean, asking about me? What did she say?" The pause felt interminable, each second stretching into infinity as I held my breath. Finally, Melissa's words came trickling through, laden with weight. "She seemed concerned about your last diagnosis. She mentioned she was worried you were in more danger than you realized." I felt a chill creep up my spine. My mind raced back to those countless times I had poured my heart into therapy, the honest exchanges that had found a home in Sarah's understanding gaze. Had I inadvertently exposed some hidden secret of my own? The idea that I might be a part of a story much larger than my own made me uneasy. I typed, "Danger? How? I don't understand." But before Melissa could respond, a flood of memories surged within me, the names, the diagnoses, the whispers of HIPAA that seemed to echo through the hallways of every psychiatric facility I had ever stepped foot in. Suddenly, I recalled my own feelings of being trapped, seen yet unseen, always an open book to those with the power to scribble in my pages. In that moment of reflection, I began to wonder if Sarah had realized that perhaps I was more than just another patient, more than just a series of symptoms and treatment plans drafted in the dim light of a therapist's office. Maybe I too had secrets worth sharing, though I had built my own wall to protect them. My thoughts spiraled again as Melissa's follow-up came. "She wanted me to find you and tell you this. She thinks you need to see her, to understand something she uncovered." My mind reeled. Was it reckless to consider meeting with someone who had been fired, someone on the fringes of this clinical world? Yet, a part of me felt the pull towards Sarah, an anchor that called out through the disarray of my thoughts. Maybe she held the key to understanding those hidden fragments of myself I had kept so tightly wrapped. Where can I find her? I found myself typing without thought. Melissa replied almost immediately, I can give you her address, but I don't feel good about this, you know? Be careful. That care rang like a distant bell against the backdrop of my apprehension, and I found comfort in it, a reminder that I wasn't truly alone in this moment. As I read the address, a sense of determination washed over me, mingling with the anxiety that had taken residence in my chest. I could investigate my own narrative. Perhaps, like Sarah, I had been woven into a larger fabric of existence, one that danced between known truths and hidden realities. And so, with every heartbeat echoing my pulsing thoughts, I made up my mind. I needed to meet Sarah, to forge a connection that could shed light on her mysteries and perhaps my own. The sun dipped low in the sky as I prepared myself for the encounter. I felt the shapes of the shadows outside elongate, stretching toward the horizon, much like the threads of fate pulling us together. As I drove toward her address, the scenery blurred by, each mile marked with a question, a longing, an eagerness to embrace whatever awaited me. My mind buzzed like a hive, each curiosity a little bee searching for a flower, unsure of the nectar hidden within. Would I find answers to my own buried truths, or would I unravel the deeper meanings behind Sarah's journey? I parked outside a modest apartment complex that looked both inviting and intimidating, and as I stepped out of the car, a strange calm settled over me, settling the racing thoughts tumbling like jumbled leaves in the wind. I approached her door and raised my hand to knock, my pulse quickening as I fought the urge to turn back. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I knocked. Each sound echoed like a heartbeat against the wood. I stood there, waiting, breath held. It felt as though the world had condensed into this moment. A few moments passed before the door creaked open, revealing Sarah's familiar face, though it seemed altered, marked by worry and disarray. Her eyes flickered with recognition and a hint of relief, as if she had been bracing herself for this moment. You came, she said softly, and just like that, I stepped over the threshold, into her story, our stories united, as curiosity whispered infinite possibilities of truths yet to be revealed. And as I crossed into her living space, amidst the clutter of papers, stray books on mental health, and empty coffee cups, that sense of connection blossomed, cradled in the realization that perhaps every secret worth keeping leads us not just into shadows, but toward the light of understanding ourselves and one another. The question fluttered through my mind like a moth drawn to the dim light of my living room. It was simple, but the implications loomed heavy on my heart. Am I the asshole for charging my adult children rent? I never imagined this is where I would find myself at 55, standing at the crossroads of nurturing love and harsh reality. My children, Claire and Josh, had both moved back in after college, faced with a tight job market and student loans that loomed like clouds ready to burst. It felt like just yesterday I was sending them off into the world, filled with ambition and dreams, and now the stack of bills, once a distant whisper, was suddenly a roiling shout that demanded to be heard. I loved my children fiercely, but the reality of our situation was different now. My modest home, decorated with family photos that were practically engraved in my heart, was quickly becoming a shared refuge rather than a home. Things shifted, however, when the conversation turned to finances one evening while we surveyed my faded kitchen, once filled with laughter and now littered with remnants of takeout dinners. I broached the subject lightly, almost gingerly, trying to extricate myself from the churning feeling of guilt that wound tightly in my gut. You know, it's not that we can't help each other, I started, but maybe we should think about small contributions for living here. Claire, always the more outspoken of the two, rolled her eyes, casting a glance at Josh, who sat with his head buried in his phone, blissfully unaware. Seriously, Mom? Rent? We're trying to find our footing. She replied, exasperation cutting through her voice like a knife. I felt my heart sink as Josh chimed in, softening the blow with, we're still your kids, you know. Initially, I shrugged off their anger, convincing myself it stemmed from the stress of their own financial burdens, yet the guilt lingered like a shadow. The thought that I might be seen as cold or unloving gnawed at me. My thoughts spiraled, had I failed them by expecting them to contribute to the household? But then, another voice in my head reminded me of the sacrifices I had made. I had worked extra shifts to give them what they needed, and it dawned on me that this was about preparing them for the realities of adulthood, not about making me less of a mother. Still, I wrestled nightly with the decision, my journal filled with poignant reflections on whether love and responsibility could coexist without one overshadowing the other. It was during a heated argument a few days later that it all boiled over, my attempts at calm being met with more resentment. You say you're teaching us, but this feels more like punishment, Claire shouted, tears in her eyes. I held my breath, the weight of her distress settling heavily on my shoulders. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just about money, it was about trust and recognition. I'm not punishing you. I want you both to thrive. I want you to prepare for the world outside these walls, I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. The room became engulfed in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. It was clear I needed to reconsider the way forward. After much soul-searching, I decided to propose a compromise that would allow us to keep our familial bond intact. The very next day, I gathered my children and talked through my thoughts, removing the label of rent and instead framing it as a living contribution, focusing on what they could help with, whether it was chores or a small monthly amount that would go toward shared costs. To my surprise, they listened, the tension in the room gradually ebbing as we discussed our expectations with open hearts. So it's not about just money, right? It's teamwork? Josh asked, his eyes lighting up with understanding. I nodded fervently, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. We moved forward with boundaries but also with a renewed sense of cooperation, and I marveled at the transformation that occurred, realizing we were not simply roommates navigating rent but rather a family redefining our dynamics together. As the weeks turned into months, I discovered that this change not only eased my financial burden but also rekindled a sense of shared purpose among us. Conversations returned to the table, laughter emanated from our shared moments, and in those evenings spent together, it felt as if we were finding our way back, stitching back together what was nearly frayed. The idea of charging them rent became not a source of resentment but a catalyst for deeper connection. In hindsight, I didn't just charge them, I opened the door to joint stewardship of our lives, an adjustment that allowed us to step forward together rather than apart. As for updates, it's been almost a year since the paradigm shift, and I'm heartened to say Claire now has an internship that could lead to a full-time job, while Josh is earning his keep through freelance gigs. They still contribute to household expenses, each month passing me their share with pride, as if each note exchanged is more than just money, but a message that reads, "We've got this, together." And as I sit in the same faded kitchen, watching them grow into the people I always hoped they would be, I realize this journey has taught me as much as it has taught them. Am I the asshole? Perhaps once, but I've come to understand that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the strongest connections. As I sit in that faded kitchen, sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains, casting soft shadows on the table where we gather for our makeshift family meetings, I reflect on how our home has transformed over the past few months. When Josh and Emily moved in, there was a palpable tension in the air, a mix of expectation and uncertainty. I had been battling my own insecurities and regrets about charging them rent, fearing it would disrupt our bond. Yet, every time I see them, filled with determination. As they balance schoolwork with part-time jobs, I feel an overwhelming sense of pride. Each evening, as we share our meals, the laughter echoes in the corners of the room, wrapping around us like a warm blanket, dispelling any lingering doubt I had initially held about my decision. It had been Josh who first approached me with concern about finances after losing his last full-time job. He spoke earnestly about wanting to contribute more rather than feel like a burden. "I don't want you to struggle because of me," he had said, that familiar spark of responsibility igniting in his eyes. How could I argue with that? Emily followed suit, her spirit equally fired up, insisting that she too wanted to pitch in, to contribute to the household in a way that felt meaningful. It was then that I realized this was about more than just money, it was about empowerment. With the rent agreement in place, I made it abundantly clear that their contributions would be saved toward a future goal, perhaps toward their educational aspirations or an eventual escape of their own, helping to ensure they wouldn't find themselves completely reliant on me once they stepped into the wider world. Each time I handed them a receipt showing their contributions, I would joke, "Look at you, you're practically business owners now." Following those jokes were serious discussions about budgeting and saving. They would listen intently, their eyes bright, eager to absorb the advice, while I shared tales from my own youth, trying to weave in lessons learned as I stumbled through life. Those evenings began to intertwine with deeper conversations about dreams, fears, and the kind of people they envisioned themselves becoming. With every discussion, I could feel our relationship evolving, both as a parent and as individuals seeking to understand one another. One rainy afternoon, however, things took a challenging turn. Emily returned home distraught, her usual spark dulled. "Mom, I don't know if I can continue doing this. It feels like everything is piling on top of me," she admitted, falling onto the couch, her voice strained and defeated. I joined her on the couch, pulling the fuzzy blanket over us as we settled into the silence that accompanied her heavy words. The weight of missed assignments and looming deadlines pressed on her like an ocean wave, and I could see the hope in her eyes flicker momentarily. What if we adjust a bit? Rent doesn't always have to be paid in full, I offered gently. Your well-being comes first. It's okay to ask for help. My words seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, silence enveloped us before she finally nodded, a small smile breaking through the storm clouds. As the weeks rolled by, we found new rhythms, discussing every tweak and adjustment we made to our agreements candidly. Josh, too, began to share his own struggles more openly, confessing moments of loneliness and his fear of never reaching the ambitions he carried. It was during one of these powerful exchanges that I understood the true essence of decisions made from love. Not only did they learn responsibility, but they also discovered vulnerability and space for genuine dialogue, something I had always longed for us to possess. We emerged stronger as a family, moved forward by empathy and mutual respect, acknowledging our individual journeys without losing sight of our shared path. In this warm cocoon of familiarity and love, I've realized that our home isn't just a physical space, it's a sanctuary carved from our shared experiences, successes, and collective heartaches. The question of whether I was the asshole lingers somewhere in the back of my mind, but it has transformed from a painful inquiry into an echo of a lesson learned. By fostering their independence within the walls of our home, I not only nurtured their growth but also kept the ties of our relationship tightly woven, reminding us all that love doesn't fade in the face of responsibility. Instead, it evolves, deepening in ways I could never have imagined. As I sit here, I can see that it isn't about the money or even the chores, it's about understanding, growth, and creating an environment where we can all be better versions of ourselves together. And while the future is uncertain, a chorus of questions still unanswered, I feel a profound sense of gratitude for this shared journey, knowing that being a parent is less about getting it right all the time and more about navigating every twist and turn with an open heart. Sometimes, I find solace in the thought of letting each of them fly with their own set of wings, ready to embrace whatever the world has in store, while I would remain here, cheering them on from the sidelines, proud of the choices we made together in this home of ours. However, as the weeks passed, I began to experience an unfamiliar unease, a gentle pressure building beneath the surface of our harmonious existence. It started with those quiet moments, sitting alone in my favorite worn-out chair while Josh and Lena collaborated at the kitchen table, their laughter and chatter creating a cozy atmosphere that made my heart swell with pride. Yet, tucked away in the corner of my mind was a prickling doubt, whispering that perhaps I had placed an unnecessary burden on their shoulders. The thoughts started to gnaw at me during sleepless nights, where thoughts raced through my mind like leaves caught in a gust of wind, questioning my decisions and choices. They did, after all, come to me during the pandemic when everything had been uncertain, their lives upended in ways I couldn't fully grasp. I remember my own parents, who had faced such trials with grit and resilience, but never once did they charge me rent. As days turned into weeks, the tight-knit bond we shared sometimes felt like it stood on shaky ground. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the joy of our routines, breakfast-making competitions, game nights peppered with sarcasm and laughter. And those afternoons when I would find them lost in their respective worlds, creativity bursting from them like blooming wildflowers. But the shadows of my thoughts lingered, lingering as a subtle reminder that their growing independence came with its own set of fears. One night, after an especially hectic day, I was cleaning up the remnants of dinner, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of clarity. I turned to them and, in a voice that quivered with a mix of uncertainty and resolve, asked if they felt the same way I did. To my surprise, their expressions turned serious, and I felt as if I had ventured into unknown territory. Josh, with his thoughtful gaze, spoke first. "Mom, we appreciate everything you've done for us. We're here because you let us be ourselves, and if charging rent is part of that, then we accept it as a part of our growth." Lena, always the more intuitive one, added, "It's funny you mention this because I was worried it was our responsibility to take care of you, not the other way around." Their words, laden with sincerity, left me both relieved and bewildered. Here I was, thinking I was the one responsible for their future, yet together, we had created something profound, a partnership built on mutual respect and support. The subsequent weeks held a newfound sense of openness, the pressure lifted, replaced by unexpected lightness. We spoke often, delving into deeper conversations about financial stability, career aspirations, and dreams yet to be realized. Each discussion became a building block, forming a bridge between my worries and their understanding of adulthood, and suddenly, Josh and Lena were no longer just my children, but partners in a shared journey of life. As we moved further into this phase of our lives, I began to find joy in the small victories, the little projects that each of them undertook that ventured into adulthood's daunting reality, with me as a spectator cheering them on in the background. One evening, each of them sat next to me, Josh back from a successful project pitch, Lena having submitted her first freelance article, the air thick with accomplishment. I placed my hand on theirs, a silent acknowledgement of our collective achievements, a bond that transcended the need for rent or adulting responsibilities. They were soaring, and I realized I was simply here to help them acclimate to the winds beneath their wings. And so our story evolved, settling into a rhythm that felt genuine and nurturing. It was about more than money or bills, it was about lessons learned under our roof, and I cherished the thought that perhaps I hadn't been the asshole after all. It was merely the ebb and flow of family dynamics shifting. With nights spent under the gentle glow of lamplight discussing prospects and dreams, I understood that being together, sharing our fears and aspirations, had emboldened us, allowing for a new understanding about what it means to navigate adulthood together. As we moved further into this unknown future, I embraced it. The unknown no longer felt like a weight but a canvas awaiting our colors. Perhaps being a parent is knowing when to let the reins go, and I felt ready for whatever paths lay ahead. The uncertainty didn't haunt me anymore, it ignited a sense of adventure. So, maybe in this journey, I was never an asshole, but rather just a guide, and we were collectively painting a beautiful masterpiece of our shared lives. Hiding my expensive shampoo and conditioner from my friend's guest wasn't a decision I took lightly, but as I stood in my small, dimly lit bathroom, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination swirling in my chest. I worked hard to earn the little luxuries in my life, especially my indulgent hair products that had become something of a personal ritual. To call them expensive seemed an understatement. They were a splurge, a treat for myself after months of saving and budgeting. My bathroom had always felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could retreat from the chaos of the outside world. I kept it meticulously organized, arranging everything on its shelves with care. But recently, a shadow had crossed the threshold of my sanctuary, Jess, my impulsive yet adventurous friend who had just moved into her new apartment. She invited me over often, and I loved spending time in her vibrant, chaotic space. However, Jess had this adorable but reckless knack for inviting people to stay over without asking, and her latest guest, Tara, seemed to embody all of Jess's wildest impulses. The first time Tara crashed at Jess's place, I was surprised at how quickly the two hit it off. Tara was a friend of a friend, someone I hadn't known well but instantly sensed was not particularly mindful of personal boundaries, especially when it came to possessions that didn't belong to her. When I learned she was staying for a few weeks, I started to feel uneasy, especially about my beloved shampoo and conditioner that I'd proudly displayed on my bathroom shelf. My routine had always included a lavish wash and condition cycle that lulled me into a sense of peace. I dreaded the idea of Tara, with her carelessness, pouring things out like they were a bottle of cheap soda. I couldn't help but imagine the horror of her washing her hair with my expensive products, treating them like mere souvenirs from the drugstore. Gradually, the creeping anxiety prompted me to act. One night, armed with the notion that this was, quite simply, my hair ritual we were talking about, I tucked both bottles away in the back corner of my closet, swaddled in soft towels, the equivalent of a security blanket. It felt a bit ridiculous, but as I tucked the last towel around them, a sense of relief washed over me like a soothing balm. I convinced myself this wasn't about being selfish, it was about protecting a cherished part of my routine. Yet, the first morning after doing so, a wave of guilt crashed over me. I knew Jess would find it odd if Tara expressed interest in trying to use my products and got no response. That guilt clung to me through breakfast, settling deep in my stomach as Jess happened to mention Tara's curiosity about my shower setup. A part of me wanted to say, "Oh, I hid my shampoo," but I never found the words. Instead, I casually brushed it off, hoping Jess would do the same. That evening, as I basked in my freshly cleaned hair, I overheard Jess telling Tara about my shampoo and conditioner. I felt my heart speed up. I knew she could have easily sought them out. The sheer panic coursing through me was further amplified when I overheard Tara excitedly asking if she could use them. Oh no, I thought, my heart sinking. My mind raced at the thought of my precious products being neglected, warped into a messy heap of potentially sticky hair. I knew I needed to keep them safe, to preserve my little corner of joy, but part of me felt like a villain for shutting my friend out from sharing in that joy. Weeks passed. I never let Tara close enough to my bathroom to even know what awaited her behind that perfectly organized door. Jess noticed my retreat into the bathroom, The strange avoidance of discussing products, and the unspoken tension grew. One afternoon, the gentle rain tapped on the window as we lounged on the couch, and Jess innocently broke the silence. "Why don't you like Tara?" After a long silence, I finally admitted the truth. I could feel my voice vibrating with anxiety as I explained everything: my fear, the guilty pleasure of my routine, and how I wanted to protect it from something outside of my control. Jess listened, her expression thoughtful. "It's okay to worry about your things, but you could have trusted me or Tara with it." I hadn't thought of it that way. It was a wake-up call, and even though I felt a weight lift off my chest, I still worried about how to turn around this small mountain of tension. That evening, I decided to take a step toward resolution. I apologized to Jess for hiding my shampoo and asked her to invite Tara to my place and share my routine with her. That night, I found myself pouring the leftover conditioner effortlessly into 2 fun little travel bottles, each adorned with tags from the local craft store. I felt a little silly but undeniably excited. As Jess and Tara cooed over the softness of my hair and products that now graced Tara's curls too, my heart swelled with an unexpected warmth. In that moment, the worry faded and revealed a simple truth: sometimes, sharing your treasures can create a bond far deeper than anything you could have imagined. I learned that night the importance of trust, and the joy that can spring from letting someone in. In time, Tara began to understand the reason behind my initial hesitation and even sought out her own version of expensive hair care, which made us laugh. It turned out the deeper conflict wasn't me being protective of my possessions but rather the challenge of allowing kindness and vulnerability to thrive in the face of anxiety. Update: a few months later, as we were all sprawled in Jess's living room post-movie, Tara casually remarked about how my products had been a game changer for her hair. A shared celebration emerged from that little mention, and in the light of her compliment, I realized my shampoo and conditioner had become a bridge rather than a barrier, strengthening the bond of friendship we had forged together. Just like that. The little pieces of my past no longer felt like possessions to guard, but instead reminders of how precious connections can be when fears are set aside. As the afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Jess's living room, casting gentle patterns on the floor, I found myself wrapped in a comfort I hadn't anticipated. The remnants of popcorn littered the coffee table, and the warm laughter of my friends mingled with the last fading echoes of the movie we had just finished watching. Jess, ever the host, had arranged an impressive spread of snacks, and the sweet familiarity in the air was both soothing and invigorating. Tara's passing comment about my luxurious shampoo and conditioner stirred something profound within me. I had always viewed my hair products as artifacts of exclusivity, treasures to be safeguarded like fragile relics from a past that felt so foreign now. I'd held so tightly to my fears about sharing them, fears that stemmed from memories of being laughed at for my tastes, or feeling out of place when unable to relate to the more frugal habits of others. Yet, sitting there, watching the joy spread across Tara's face as she spoke about how my products had transformed her hair, I realized that I had unwittingly constructed unnecessary walls around my treasures. Each game changer she recounted served as a testament to the bonds we were building, not just over hair care but over shared experiences and vulnerabilities. The tension in my chest, which once tightened at the thought of my belongings being under someone else's unappreciative gaze, began to dissolve like ice on a warm day. As the conversation flowed and we made plans for our next movie night, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. I was gradually learning that sharing a part of myself didn't deplete my identity; instead, it enriched the connection we had cultivated. It inspired me to reflect on my resistance to letting others in. I had spent so long afraid that my belongings might define me in ways I didn't want, when in actuality, they had become a thread in the fabric of our friendship, just like the conversations we shared about dreams, ambitions, and insecurities. In the weeks that followed, I began not only to share my shampoo and conditioner with Tara but also to be more open about my other passions. One evening, while we were sitting on the porch, I showed her my collection of rare vinyl records, each with a story behind it. Tara listened intently, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, and soon we were immersed in discussions about music that led us to swap recommendations and have deep conversations about the feelings that different albums evoked in us. I began to see my unique preferences, whether in hair care or music, as invitations rather than barriers, inviting connections where I might have otherwise been guarded. As these connections blossomed, it became clear that my journey was no longer just about overcoming anxiety; it had transformed into a celebration of shared experiences. My friends often joked about being product prescribers, each confidently recommending their go-to beauty secrets or stylistic tips, and with every laugh and playful criticism, I felt more at home. We even joked about hosting a hair care night where we'd explore different styles while trading our favorite products. It inspired me to create a cozy, safe space where everyone could come together, no longer just around possessions but around an openness to learn and share. Looking back, I realized that my initial instinct to hide my shampoo and conditioner had stemmed from a fear of vulnerability, yet here I was, a few months later, celebrating connections that had formed not in spite of my unique identity but because of it. I had found a community that cherished each other's quirks, welcoming all that made us who we are. This realization settled in my heart like a warm glow, reminding me that sometimes, the things we fear most about sharing are the very things that unlock a deeper understanding within our relationships. So, when Tara reminisced about that fateful day in Jess's living room, it wasn't just a compliment, it was that shared bridge, a memory that would always remind me of the importance of opening my heart and allowing friendship to weave its way into the fabric of my life. And as we all gathered again for those cozy movie nights, my heart swelled with gratitude, for I had learned that the most precious possessions of all are the bonds we cultivate and cherish with those we hold dear. Our evenings together soon became a ritual, a sanctuary filled with laughter, old movies, and the steady ebb and flow of conversation that deepened our friendships. Tara, with her infectious enthusiasm, often took the lead, introducing us to the latest comedies or nostalgic flicks from the 90s. Each time we settled in on the couch, popcorn in hand, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since I first met them. The little insecurities I had once clung to, my fear of losing my prized hair products or the jealousy I felt when Tara first used them, had transformed into a comfort, a reminder that vulnerability could be the cornerstone of connection. There was something about seeing Tara effortlessly toss her hair over her shoulder, the glossy shine catching the light like a beautifully woven thread connecting us all. One evening, after binge-watching a series, the topic shifted to future plans, dreams and aspirations, the kind that often linger in the quiet corners of our minds. Tara spoke of her ambition to start a blog about beauty and self-care, a project that had been simmering just beneath the surface. As she spoke, I felt a bubbling sense of pride for her, tinged with a familiar pull of envy. It seemed so effortless for her, proclaiming her passion to the world, while I'd always been apprehensive about sharing my own nuances with others. It was then that I remembered the first day she had borrowed my shampoo, the piano line of laughter spilling from her lips when I first revealed my stash, the way she had touched each bottle with reverence, as if holding a gem. After a thoughtful pause, I decided to share, a leap of faith that surprised even me. I opened up about my trepidation towards vulnerability and how I had kept my products hidden, all of it transforming into an opportunity to encourage her ambition. Tara listened, her expression shifting from curiosity to understanding, and as she did, Jess chimed in, sharing her own struggles with self-doubt. There was a flicker of realization in the air, an unspoken bond that connected the three of us through shared fears and expectations. For that brief moment, it felt as if I was peeling back the layers of a protective shell, bearing parts of myself that had long been closed off. As our conversation became more heartfelt, laughter mingling with a shared sense of vulnerability, I felt the weight of my earlier insecurities lift. It was a relief to acknowledge that we all had our ups and downs, insecurities and aspirations alike, and our friendship had become a safe space where we could lay it all bare. On that night, we forged a pact to not only support each other in achieving our dreams but also to celebrate our failures as part of this imperfect, beautiful tapestry we were weaving together. Weeks rolled into months, and soon Tara launched her blog, drawing from every laugh, every tear, and every awkward moment we had shared as friends. I watched her thrive, and with each updated post she published, I felt a part of that journey. She was my friend, and in her success, I celebrated my own triumph over my fears. That bond we formed wasn't just about my shampoo, it was a reflection of understanding, trust, and the beautiful messiness of life. In the quiet hours of the night, as I lay beneath the comforting weight of my blankets, I often found myself smiling, recalling the beginning of this incredible journey. The threads woven through friendship had become the very fabric of my existence, reminding me that every data point of insecurity dissolved in the glow of genuine connections. The profound lesson I learned, encased in the simplicity of shared moments over popcorn and laughter, was that authenticity in relationships can turn even our smallest concerns into a celebration of vulnerability, crafting a life that's rich not in possessions, but deep in love and understanding. And every time I reached for my bottles of shampoo and conditioner, I smiled, knowing they now served not just a personal ritual, but a reminder of the friendships I cherished and the bridges we had built together. The phone call came out of the blue, shattering the fragile peace I had crafted for myself and my 2 young children in the years since the divorce. "He's gone," the voice on the other end faltered, and my heart sank. It was from a mutual friend, one of the few remaining ties to a man who had once been my partner before life took us down vastly different paths. The news of my ex-husband's sudden passing brought forth a wave of conflicting emotions that crashed over me like a stormy sea: anger, grief, and even remnants of love mingled with memories of the life we built together, now reduced to echoes and ghostly shadows. My children, Jason and Lily, played quietly in the living room, unaware of the turmoil brewing just beyond their innocence. What would I tell them? Should I bring them to the funeral? As the moments ticked away, I wrestled with the thought, envisioning their little faces, so full of curiosity and imagination, grappling with something so profound as death. Eventually, I made the decision: they needed to see their father, even if it was just a final goodbye wrapped in an unfamiliar wrapping of grief and closure. On the day of the funeral, the autumn leaves fluttered to the ground, painting a poignant backdrop of gold and crimson. The church, its steeple rising into the gray sky, seemed to absorb the sorrow unfolding within its walls. I held both of their small hands as we walked through the heavy wooden doors, the hushed murmurs of relatives and friends swirling around us like fog. I could feel Jason's grip tighten, his eyes darting nervously at the sight of people dressed in black, while Lily, blissfully unaware, kept asking where her daddy was. My heart ached at that innocent question. Would it be too much for them? Would they understand why we were here? But I swallowed my doubts, reminding myself that this was as much a part of our story as the laughter we had shared. We took our seats near the front, my heart racing as the service unfolded. Each word felt like a weighted stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. Echoes of memories, both painful and beautiful, reverberated in my mind, weaving a tapestry of our shared past. The moment we stood to say our final goodbyes, it became harder. Jason leaned against me, his small shoulders shaking with suppressed emotions, while Lily reached up, eyes wide and confused, asking in a hushed voice why everyone was crying. I knelt beside her, trying to explain, but my voice caught in my throat as I remembered the last time he had held her. In that frail, intimate moment, I was struck by a pang of guilt. Was I cross-building grief for my daughters? Or was this a brave moment for them, an opportunity to learn about loss and love in its most raw form? As we placed flowers on the casket, the scent mixing with the damp air, I felt a blend of sorrow and relief. Through the pain, I saw a flicker of resilience in their eyes, a silent acknowledgement that we had each other, bonded by our grief but steadfast against the storms beyond. The funeral was a long-awaited clarity, an intricate knot being untied slowly but surely, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. When it was done, and we stepped outside, the sun broke through the heavy clouds, casting a warm glow on our faces like a quiet blessing. As we drove home, the atmosphere in the car felt strangely lighter despite the weight of the day's events. I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing my kids fall asleep, heads leaning against each other without a care in the world. A soft hum of a lullaby from the radio melded perfectly with their gentle breathing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps I had done the right thing. I knew that the question would linger in the shadows of my mind: am I the asshole for taking them to their dad's funeral? But at that moment, I felt the weight of the world lift just a little, enough to know that perhaps this was a pivotal moment for all of us. When we got home, I tucked them into bed, kissed their foreheads, and closed their door lightly. In the quiet of the night, I reflected on our journey and the love that continued to bind us, even amid chaos. Maybe in sharing that last goodbye with their father, I taught them more about life and love than I could have anticipated. A few months later, after grappling with the grief and growing even closer as a family, I received a message from my ex-husband's sister, expressing gratitude for bringing the children to the funeral. She had shared how seeing Jason and Lily, alive and full of spirit, reminded everyone of the kindness he had in life even after the rocky years of our separation. It surprised me how much that acknowledgement lifted my spirits. And as I sat under the evening sky, watching the stars blink to life, I finally felt at peace with my decision. Through heartbreak, we had found a new, albeit different, strength, and I had come to realize that even in death, there are lessons of love we could carry forward. In the days following the funeral, I found myself reflecting on the lessons we had extracted from such a heavy experience. The gray clouds still lingered, but they had dulled, and the sun had begun to peek through them, offering a tender warmth I hadn't felt in months. Jason and Lily seemed lighter, too, their laughter echoing through our home like notes of a sweet melody that I had forgotten existed. We often held impromptu dance parties in our living room, twirling around to songs we'd collectively chosen, diving into that blissful state where worries melted away. It was during one of these dance-offs that I looked down to see their wide, carefree grins mirrored in my own, And at that moment, I realized how profoundly their father's passing had transformed our lives. What I had originally feared would unravel the fragile stitchwork of our family, his absence was, against all odds, stitching us closer together. I thought of the days when I would speak about Jason, carefully navigating the minefield of memories. I never belittled the complexities of our past, but as we revisited those moments, his laugh during movie nights, his ridiculous attempts at cooking, I saw my kids embrace their father's humanity. They were mourning him, but they were also celebrating the colorful imprints he had left behind. It was a complicated tapestry of memories, threaded with both pain and joy, and we were weaving it tighter each time we shared those tales. One evening, while tucking them into bed, Lily, with her big brown eyes twinkling like stars, asked if we could make a memory jar. "We can put in all the best things we remember about Dad," she said softly, her tiny fingers pulling the hem of her blanket. Jason nodded, his brow furrowed in thought, thinking of the happiest moments he could find. We grabbed an assortment of markers, colorful paper, and a simple glass jar I had kept on a shelf, dusting it off like a forgotten treasure. Night after night, we would write little stories, favorite moments, even sporadic thoughts that seemed to flash from the corners of their minds, each one a colorful reflection of their father. It felt cathartic, as though by encapsulating those memories, we were holding on to him in a way that wouldn't let go as time moved forward. Yet, there was still a lingering uncertainty in my heart. Even with the sense of community that filled my surroundings, I feared judgment. Did I make the right choice about the funeral? On an increasingly quiet evening, I found myself scrolling through social media, the old posts, the funeral photos, comments of sympathy interspersed with shared memories. Yet there it was, the muffled sting of one comment that caught my eye and twisted in my gut: why on earth would you bring the kids to their father's funeral? I swallowed hard, contemplating the bluntness of it. Did I really make a grave mistake by honoring a man they had known as their father? Poking at that old wound opened up a familiar cascade of guilt. The anger crept in, too. It was unfair to project their feelings onto me. I had tried my best. As I flipped through the comments, I stumbled upon a thoughtful reply that shifted my perspective. Maybe it was a lesson in love for them, not an act of cruelty. Feeling the heaviness lift slightly, I realized I wasn't alone in this. So many parents face judgment, and for each of those harsh voices echoing in my mind, there were countless parents who had found their own way, each soldiering through their challenges, fighting battles of their own, learning to let love guide them. I closed my phone with a newfound determination and focused instead on my children, who were now deep asleep, the reassuring sound of their breaths filling the room like a comforting lullaby. Weeks passed and our little family developed a new rhythm. I sometimes still encountered sporadic judgment, especially within our small town, like when I would run into familiar faces at the grocery store. Each smiled. Nod felt loaded. Sometimes, people would make small talk about the weather, while others would simply look down, avoiding eye contact altogether. Those moments were filled with undertones of unspoken words, yet they began to bother me less. I remembered why I had made the choice to bring Jason and Lily to that funeral. It was about remembering, celebrating, and finding closure, the very things we were doing in our memory jar. One day, as we were placing a new handwritten memory into the jar, a ticket stub from a concert we had attended, it struck me how much healing was packed into those tiny slips of paper. They were seeds, really, nurturing new perspectives and fostering an understanding of our past. It had opened the door to conversations about life, love, and everything in between. I knew then that whatever anyone else might say, I was right where I needed to be. And so, as the nights rolled on and our little tradition of adding to the memory jar continued, I found that it not only enclosed stories about Jason but also made space for our own emerging narrative, a story of resilience, love, and the determination to move forward while cherishing the footprints left behind. Perhaps it wouldn't heal every pang of grief, but it fortified us with a sense of purpose in honoring what remained. With each memory shared, I felt our spirits intertwine, a quiet testament that life and love would always find a way. As I sat with them wrapped in their dreams, I recognized the profound truth in that sentiment. Even amidst the chaos of our history, we had woven a tapestry of love that would only continue to grow. And perhaps with that, I wouldn't just be a survivor of our heartache, I would be a champion for the enduring bond that we shared, a reminder that even through loss, life persistently finds room for love. The days following the funeral, I found myself wandering through a landscape of emotions that felt bright yet shadowed at times. I would often catch the scent of Jason's cologne lingering on an old jacket in the closet, a bittersweet reminder of our past that pulled at my heartstrings. The kids adjusted remarkably well to the absence of their father. For them, It was a cascade of memories they could sift through, moments captured in laughter and warmth. I often found them buried under blankets as they shared stories about their favorites, the camping trips in the backyard that morphed into grand adventures, or the spontaneous kitchen experiments that ended in a mess but always ended with giggles. Their joy danced around me, a soothing balm for the ache of loss, and I began to understand the true gifts Jason had left behind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I sat with Lily and Jason at the kitchen table, painting the memories that still flickered in our hearts. We had set out a canvas, brush strokes letting each of us contribute a color or shape that represented our remembrances. I watched as they threaded together tales of camping escapades mixed with their father's goofy jokes and stories about how he'd always sing the wrong lyrics to their favorite songs. The laughter rang out like a melody, a stark contrast to the somber silence that had enveloped our home just days earlier. I could see how much they lived in those precious whirls of color and warmth, every stroke a testament to their resilience and the love that endured beyond our pain. My heart swelled with pride, a realization that even through our fragmented family, the bond we shared was vibrant and alive, creating a shelter at a time when rain threatened to wash away hope. It became clear to me that we were shaping our own narrative together now, one filled with the richness of memories and the promise of new beginnings, however uncertain they might be. This was our therapy, a way to weave Jason's essence into our lives rather than letting it vanish into silence. Every time I saw my children immerse themselves in their memories, a newfound sense of purpose washed over me. They were, in many ways, guiding me to a conclusion I hadn't been ready to face just days before. Jason had left us much more than just memories of times gone by. He had imparted lessons on how to love deeply, even when things were imperfect. As the nights rolled on, I embraced the routine of storytelling, of laughter ringing through our home, and of painting their dreams. I shared with them how loss could transform into appreciation, encouraging them to always look at the silver lining, however faint it may seem on some days. Our conversations turned from sorrow to dreams of the future, filled with wild wishes and hopes that danced in their eyes. It was in moments like these that I found clarity. The past, however tumultuous, shaped not just our pain but also our resilience and our ability to pivot, to adapt, and to rise anew. One night, tucking Lily into bed after another day of reminiscing and laughter, she looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with understanding far beyond her years. "Mom," she whispered, "maybe Daddy just wanted us to be happy. Maybe that's why he wanted us to remember the fun times and not the sad ones." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of ageless wisdom being passed down, both a reflection of her father's love and her own burgeoning understanding of life. "You're right, sweetheart," I replied, pulling her close. "He wanted us to be happy, and we can honor him by living fully." As I kissed my children goodnight, a warm sense of acceptance enveloped me. I realized that Jason's death could be the end of a chapter, but it wouldn't be the end of our story. As weeks turned into months, I noticed more than just a glimmer of hope trying to burst forth in our lives. The kids began to smile more freely, and in quiet moments, they'd share funny stories about a dad who would come home with silly toys or initiate awkward dance-offs in the living room. Moments I never fully appreciated while he was there. Together we began acknowledging our pain without letting it govern our lives. Over time, I found myself at the edge of true healing, discovering that while life could be harsh, it was also beautiful, and it was our responsibility to keep it alive, to fuel it with laughter, love, and warmth. In a strange twist of fate, I became a tribute bearer of Jason's heart. And just as summer began to yield to the cool whispers of fall, I noticed an unexpected lightness in my step. It struck me one chilly evening as we roasted marshmallows in the backyard, the laughter, the camaraderie we had built, the jokes shared, this was what Jason would have wanted. We were not defining our lives by our loss, rather, we were embracing it as part of our complex tapestry. When the stars shone brightly that night, I felt the words of my children touching the strands of my heart. "Let's do this every week," Jason exclaimed as he handed me his s'more creation. "He'd definitely want us to enjoy the fun stuff." I smiled, realizing that through our journey, we would forever carry the essence of our shared past with us, not as a burden, but as a beacon, guiding us toward a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. And so, we molded a new memory each week under the stars, stitching Jason into the fabric of our lives more beautifully than I ever thought possible. Months later, as I reflected on our journey, I felt a profound sense of gratitude shape my being. Life, I concluded, like love, is an evolving narrative, an intricate dance of letting go and holding on. A few friends had reached out tentatively since the funeral, offering their condolences while hesitantly questioning my choices, but I found comfort and pride in my decision to bring the kids. It solidified our legacy and illustrated to my children the importance of accepting life's dual nature, both its joys and sorrows. With every memory painted and every moment shared, we were crafting a life that resonated not just with happiness but with an understanding that love endures, transcending even the hardest of goodbyes. And in that realization, as I moved that evening to snuff out the small fire in the backyard, I whispered a quiet promise into the night. Our future would be colored with the hues of hope, courage, and unwavering love, welcoming all the joy that life dared to send our way. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon when my daughter, Clara, burst through the front door, her cheeks flushed from fresh air and excitement, the kind of joy only a 10-year-old could muster after a long day in school. "Dad," she exclaimed, her energy swirling around the room like a flurry of bees, "can Anna come over for dinner tonight?" On any other day, I would have jumped at the opportunity to have a friend of hers over, but that particular evening, I had a meeting scheduled that would run late, and Clara's best friend lived a good 20-minute walk away. Balancing work and family life was a constant juggling act, but this seemingly simple question ignited a flicker of guilt deep inside me, forcing me into a mental tug-of-war. "Sweetheart," I said softly, knowing I had to explain without dampening her spirits, "I have to leave for my meeting, and I can't walk Anna home after dinner like you want. I'll be back late." Clara's face fell for a moment, her bright smile wavering, but she nodded with an understanding that belied her age. "Okay, Dad," she whispered, but the disappointment hung thick in the air like a low-hanging cloud. As I prepared dinner, a simple pasta dish that Clara loved, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was letting both her and Anna down. After dinner, Clara felt it was essential to call Anna's parents to confirm she could stay for a little longer, and when the conversation shifted to how I wouldn't be able to escort Anna home, I heard muffled laughter on the other end of the line. "It's only a short walk," Anna's mom assured Clara. "She can handle it." I tried to shake off the sinking feeling in my stomach, but the weight of their reassurances felt like daggers piercing my resolve. I had never been one to shy away from responsibilities, and as the minutes trickled away before my meeting, the guilt morphed into an unsettling storm brewing inside me. What if something happened to Anna on that walk? What if I was the one responsible for that? My anxiety was heightened by the swirling chaos of parental judgment that we often hammered into each other on the schoolyard, the unspoken competition of who was doing a better job. I wondered, had I crossed a line? I genuinely believed my reasons were valid, but the idea of Clara's guilt was unbearable. I began to question whether I was, in fact, the one in the wrong. I eventually left for my meeting, doing my best to focus on the work at hand, yet the thought of Clara and her friend lingered as a whisper in my mind, reminding me of the company I was seeking to avoid. When I finally returned home, Clara was sitting on the couch, still waiting for me, while Anna had gone home, and I could not tell if Clara was sad or just simply tired. "Sorry, sweetheart," I murmured, kneeling beside her, "I know it wasn't exactly what you wanted tonight." To my surprise, she looked up at me with a smile that melted the tension away. "It's okay, Dad," she said simply, brushing it off with a wave of her tiny hand. Anna said she liked the walk. That revelation pulled me back, the bubble of relief rising in my chest. On the surface, it was evident Clara had accepted the situation, yet something deep inside me was still yearning for validation. Was I really the asshole here, or just a dad trying to balance practicalities with his daughter's happiness? I lingered on that question as I tucked Clara in that night, the moon casting a gentle glow through her window, and somehow, I realized that parenting meant navigating the gray areas where decisions could neither be categorized as purely right or wrong. A few weeks later, I stumbled upon a thread on Reddit titled "A Myth Asshole," and I curiously typed in my experience. The responses flooded in, varying from fellow parents who validated my struggle to some who accused me of negligence. As I read through the comments, a peculiar sense of community washed over me. It turned out, every parent has been faced with conflicting priorities, and perhaps, the discomfort that lingered in my chest that night was merely a reminder that parenting isn't about perfection, but rather the love and intention behind our actions. The post received a surprising amount of traction, and as I scrolled through a mix of perspectives, a gentle realization settled in my mind: there's no manual for being a parent, we all simply navigate through the darkness, hoping to find a flicker of understanding along the way. As these thoughts echoed in my mind, I savored the comforting warmth of my supportive Reddit community, reflecting on the multifaceted journey of parenthood, and there, amid virtual strangers, I found solace. It was neither the validation I had craved nor the judgment I had feared, but a realization that what mattered most wasn't if I was right, but that I cared deeply enough to question it in the first place. With that gentle realization still warming my heart, I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, surrounded by the familiar chaos of my daughter's room, a tapestry of colorful drawings and dolls that had long ago discarded their pristine packaging. It was within this sanctuary of innocence and creativity that I began to understand the struggle each parent faces in their own way. I felt a pang of guilt about Rebecca, my daughter's friend, and how I had brushed off her request for a walk home. The faint echoes of their earlier laughter still lingered in the air, and I could almost hear the way the two of them had shouted secrets back and forth while playing in the backyard. It struck me then, that in my own swirling thoughts about chores and dinner, I had overlooked the little things that made my daughter feel secure and connected, and Rebecca too. I remembered how they would share dreams of future adventures while sitting on the swings, eyes bright with imagination. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with soft purples and oranges, I tried to piece together what had truly happened earlier. That day, the moment when I dismissed Rebecca's request so easily. It was a moment softened by the warmth of familiarity, that unwritten bond between parents that often feels too delicate to traverse. Perhaps I had thought it would be too much trouble, or maybe I didn't see Rebecca in the light of concern that my daughter did, an almost extension of our family, a girl who laughed a little louder with us, yet remained apart at times. The outdoors were chilly now, the air carrying a crisp scent of fall that crackled like dry leaves underfoot, and I knew I needed to make things right. Before I had time to ruminate any further, I stood up and slipped on my shoes, the soles connecting with the cool wooden floor offering a jolt of determination. I headed downstairs, fueled by purpose rather than guilt, and opened the front door into that refreshing evening chill. I could still see the faint glow of the streetlights ahead, a warm beacon against the encroaching night. Clutching my phone tightly, I called Rebecca's mother. The line beeped, echoing my uncertainty as I waited for her voice, but when she picked up, she was kind, instead of judgmental. We briefly chatted, exchanging snippets of our days, and when I mentioned how I had been contemplating the walk home I neglected, I could hear the smile in her voice when she responded. It was all so simple, yet I felt the weight of each moment we shared gonna dissolve any lingering worries. She assured me Rebecca had made it home just fine, but before we hung up, I asked if it might be all right if I walked with her to school the next day, just to ensure I was a better neighbor and a better parent. There was a brief moment of silence before Rebecca's mother chuckled. Absolutely, I think she'd love that. As I disconnected the call, the tight knot of anxiety in my chest began to untwist. It was hard to describe, that feeling of connection forming anew in this little community encapsulated by the comfort of nightly routines and the soft glow of streetlights. I found myself wandering through the evening, letting my mind linger on small hopes that seemed very large, as I mulled over the power of small gestures and the simple, intricate dance of friendships. Children, I realized, see everything in black and white, navigating their worlds in vivid colors of love and care, and perhaps it was that innocence I had taken for granted. By the time I returned home, the stars were scattered like tiny lanterns across the sky, and every worry I had momentarily faded into the backdrop of an evening gone to slumber. As I nestled into bed that night, something shifted within me, as if I had shed a layer of my past self. Even in my mistakes, the willingness to act, to reach out, to bridge distances however small, became a quiet fortification around my heart. After all, being a parent isn't about perfection but is rooted in connection in those very moments when we recognize our missteps and find ways to grow. And so, with a grateful heart and a serene mind, I drifted off into a deep sleep, knowing tomorrow would hold new possibilities, both for me and for Rebecca, entwined in this dance of discovery we call growing up. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtain, casting soft patterns across my bedroom walls and nudging me awake. The remnants of last night's insights lingered in my mind like a gentle whisper, reminding me of the intricacies of parenting and the lessons tucked within every moment. I rose from my bed feeling lighter, ready to nurture not just my daughter, but also the evolving bond I shared with her friend, Leah. As I maneuvered through our cozy kitchen, its walls adorned with family photographs chronicling our collective laughter and tears, I heard the familiar patter of small feet along the hallway. Rebecca appeared, her hair a tousled halo and her eyes still heavy with sleep, but brimming with the exuberance of a new day. "Can Leah come over today?" she asked, a spark of enthusiasm illuminating her face. My heart warmed at the sight of her unfiltered joy, and I nodded, already imagining the giggles and games that would fill our living room. But a pang of worry threaded through my thoughts. Would Leah feel welcome? Would she, too, share that flicker of childhood glee? With a determined spirit, I set about preparing for their day together. A fresh pot of cocoa brewing, I arranged some snacks, goldfish crackers shaped like tiny fish and vibrant fruits that glistened in the morning light. I left the door open, listening to the sweet sounds of Rebecca making elaborate plans for their imaginary adventures. Over the next few hours, laughter erupted from the living room, a melody that transformed the mundane into a symphony of friendship. I occasionally peeked in, witnessing a tapestry of imaginative play unfold before my eyes, two young friends engaged in a world they created, a nexus of creativity that blossomed in joyous bursts. But as the clock ticked towards lunchtime, I noticed a fleeting shadow cross Leah's face, a furrow of uncertainty that contradicted her laughter. It tugged at my heart, the instinctive urge to protect my daughter from any hurtful situations. I approached them gently, inviting Leah to help me with preparing lunch, hoping to create space for our budding connection. She hesitated but eventually followed me into the kitchen, her fingers gently twirling a lock of hair, an involuntary gesture that revealed her unease. "You're really good at making art, Leah," I said, trying to bridge the gap with warmth. "I saw some of your drawings the other day, how do you come up with those ideas?" Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise igniting amid the softness of her vulnerability. For a moment, she hesitated before venturing, "I just think about what makes me happy." Encouraged by her response, I nudged the conversation further, weaving in my own experiences with art, how it had helped me find joy during tough times. As we chatted, I noticed her shoulders relax, the tension ebbing away with each exchange. By the time we returned to Rebecca, there was a subtle shift in the air. Leah's laughter rang clearer, buoyed by the sense of acceptance that filled our home. After lunch, the three of us sprawled on the floor with markers, paper, and sticky notes. I watched as Leah shared her ideas with Rebecca, who infused them with her own silly antics. They embarked on a frenzy of creativity, and soon the dining room transformed into an explosion of colors, the lyrics from their favorite songs floating through the air as they danced amid their imaginings. It was in those moments, those delicate and unscripted memories, layered with laughter and imaginative play, that I felt the morning's wisdom coalesce within me. I felt grateful for the opportunity to step beyond my own discomfort. After Leah's mother arrived later in the day to retrieve her, I found myself yearning for a way to continue fostering their connection, knowing it wasn't just about me learning to navigate the complexities of relationships, it was about Rebecca growing into someone who could embrace and understand her friends' emotions, too. I felt that night, as darkness settled gently over our neighborhood, that my heart grew alongside the girls' beautiful friendship. I reflected on the valuable lesson Leah had unknowingly imparted, about how even in our uncertainties, our willingness to listen and create connections formed an unbreakable bond that made us all just a little less alone in this vast world. Resting my head on the pillow, I closed my eyes and anticipated tomorrow's adventures, each day a new page in our story, a story I had the privilege, chaos included, to help shape alongside my daughter and her friends. As sleep enveloped me once more, I found peace knowing we were all just navigating this world together, a circle of support hand in hand as we explored the worth of every little moment, including those imperfect ones where our hearts expanded just a bit more. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow across the table where I sat, a large glass of steaming coffee cradled between my hands. I wasn't what you'd call an extravagant person. In fact, I prided myself on my simplicity. But coffee, especially freshly brewed, was my guilty pleasure. It was the one indulgence I allowed myself in the otherwise orderly chaos of my life as a 31-year-old school teacher. My sister had dropped off my 8-year-old nephew, Jonah, for the weekend, as she often did when she needed a break, and while I adored the little guy, he could be a handful. Just that morning, as I indulged in my first sip of the rich, dark brew, Jonah peeked out from behind the living room couch, his eyes wide and filled with the innocent curiosity that made parenting both a joy and a challenge. I was aware of the rules around kids and caffeine. My sister often had gentle reminders about the dangers of caffeine for young ones like Jonah, yet I folded inwardly and thought about how I could have such a small moment to myself without feeling guilty. The coffee would surely not do him any harm if he just admired it from a distance, right? So there I sat, savoring that warmth, allowing myself to enjoy a moment of solitude amidst the weekend's planned chaos. As the rich scent twisted through the air, I heard Jonah's little feet skip closer, his eyes darting back and forth like he was deciding whether to venture deeper or stay put. "Aunt Mia, can I have some?" he asked, and I froze for a moment, the notion of sharing my coffee appalling yet amusing at the same time. Jonah, with his chocolate brown curls and cherubic face, gave me that hopeful gaze, and in that moment I felt the tug of decision weighing on my heart. On one hand, I wanted to tell him no, a responsible adult's instinct kicking in, fearing the rush that could send him bouncing off the walls and ruin our calm Saturday morning. But on the other hand, there was a certain sweetness and nostalgia tethered to my own childhood memories of adult behavior, a notion that adults had a magical drink that captivated and contented them. Just a little sip, I finally relented, pouring a single, cautious teaspoon into a small cup, the aroma rich and inviting. I watched as he took the cup in both hands, lifting it to his lips with a serious focus, and for a brief moment, I felt a sense of triumph, as if I had shared one of my cherished rituals with him, bonding beyond the usual aunt-nephew facade. But that triumph was overshadowed by a growing weight of doubt when Jonah made a grimace that could only be described as a mixture of confusion and alarm, his little face scrunching up as he choked on the unexpected bitterness. "Ew. That's gross," he exclaimed, immediately setting the cup down, and in that moment, I felt my heart sink. Embarrassment washed over me like a wave. Had I really just given my nephew coffee? What was I thinking? Guilt settled uncomfortably in my stomach, reminding me of the rules I had so carelessly brushed aside. Jonah's response echoed in my mind. The fun I thought we might have shared from the experience felt distant now, clouded by the undeniable responsibility that lay heavy upon me as an adult figure in his life. The thought that I might have clouded our weekend with repercussions played out in my head like an unexpected horror show, and my heartbeat quickened with the fear of needing to explain myself to my sister. Later that day, my worst fear was realized when Jonah casually mentioned our little coffee episode during dinner, and his mother's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and concern. "Mia," she said, her voice carefully measured, "I thought we talked about this. What were you thinking?" It wasn't an accusatory tone, merely an acknowledgement of the boundaries we navigate to keep our kids safe, but it cut deeper than I expected. I introduced tension into a lively Saturday dinner, and guilt washed over me anew as I tried to defend my actions, explaining my reasoning, but it felt flimsy even to my own ears. The words stumbled out. Maybe I had been foolish, seeking to connect through something that, in hindsight, was never meant to be shared. I could feel my heart racing, the apprehensive air pooling around us in palpable silence as my sister measured her next words carefully. After the initial tension faded, the conversation softened, allowing me a moment of reflection. They say being a parent is full of mistakes, and I had just stumbled into mine, with a mere glass of coffee. Nevertheless, I was determined to learn from it, to be mindful of the small pleasures that should remain mine alone, while still being the aunt who brought joy. I wrapped up the evening by redirecting our focus to the cookies we made together earlier that day. It felt good to laugh and create new memories. As I put Jonah to bed that night, he clung to the memories of cookies and stories, the earlier incident slipping into the backdrop of laughter as if it had never happened. I tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and whispered an unspoken promise to myself that I would let the adults indulge, share the experience, yet hold to the boundaries that protected the innocence still residing in young hearts. A few weeks passed before I felt the urge to update on the timing of our coffee incident, one night after a large family gathering. Jonah, unwittingly overheard commenting to his mother about wanting to try coffee again when he grew up, brought an unexpected smile, tinged with regret, to my face. My sister looked at me with that knowing smile, a mix of affection and teasing that told me she understood I was learning from this, an aunt who cared deeply, yet found herself navigating the sometimes tumultuous waters of an alternative relationship. "Maybe just wait a few years, huh?" She would chuckle softly, and I could only nod, feeling a warm embrace of acceptance around the gentle, growing bond with my nephew that promised many more adventures to come, coffee aside. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with strokes of orange and purple, I leaned back against the worn-out couch of my sister's living room, enveloped in a comfort that was both nostalgic and suffocating. The laughter of my nephew, Lucas, still echoed in my ears, a melody of youthful innocence and wonder that reminded me of everything I cherished in our relationship. It was the first time I had seriously considered how my choices, even the seemingly trivial ones, might affect him. I thought of our earlier conversation, where his curious eyes had sparked with excitement at the thought of coffee, something I had once so eagerly introduced into my own life, imagining the day I could share it with him. A part of me felt a pang of guilt for sipping my steaming mug so casually, hardly second-guessing those age-old debates surrounding caffeine and childhood. My sister had always been the more conscientious parent, the one who would often reel me in from my more impulsive decisions. In many ways, I admired her for it. Even now, as she washed the dishes in her own rhythmic, calming manner, I could see her glancing back over her shoulder, her smile a testament to our unfinished conversations, as if gauging my mind state. "Want to help me with this?" she called out, gesturing to a pile of colorful plates glinting in the fading light, her voice a soft invitation. I stood, shaking off the remnants of self-reflection, and joined her in the kitchen. As we washed and dried, our chatter turned playful, bouncing between memories of our childhood and plans for the future. The scent of the lingering dinner wafted around us like a warm blanket, the comforting aroma of roasted chicken mingling with ginger and garlic, creating a homey atmosphere that only deepened our familial bond. It was in these moments that I truly felt the depth of my connection to her and to Lucas, with every shared laugh acting as a thread weaving us tighter together. Yet, the earlier discussion about coffee pooled in my thoughts, not dissipating but rather growing denser, revealing uncharted waters in my role as an aunt. Should I really wait for him? Should I not? I realized that it wasn't about the coffee at all, it was about modeling a relationship with choices, understanding, and ultimately, moderation. Would that cup of coffee, once presented to him, symbolize a moment of bonding, or could it come to represent something he may someday even struggle with in his own life? And what if my apparent acceptance of it pushed him to seek out experiences too soon? It was a delicate dance of influence, one that weighed heavily on my heart. By the time we finished cleaning up, the stars began to peek through the darkened sky, twinkling like distant thoughts of dreams yet to come. I turned to Lucas, who had taken up residence in the corner of the living room with a pile of Lego bricks that sparkled in every color imaginable, erupting into a miniature metropolis. His concentration was captivating, his little tongue peeked out in concentrated determination as he clicked two pieces together, forming something only he could see. I crouched beside him, resting my elbows on my knees, torn between wanting to acknowledge our previous conversation and wanting to admire his creations without intruding. "What are you building?" I asked, genuinely intrigued. He paused for a moment, glanced at me, and in his innocent wisdom replied, "A cafe. You can have coffee there, and I'll have lemonade. Maybe after we finish building, we can have a pretend coffee party." That beautiful blend of imagination and earnestness brightened my heart. His words shifted my perspective entirely. Instead of thinking about coffee as a potential source of conflict, I started to envision it like this magical centerpiece of an adventure, one where we could share not just drinks but laughter, stories, and dreams. There in that moment, understanding blossomed. Perhaps it wasn't about the right age for coffee but rather about creating safe spaces for experimentation and growth, together. I leaned in closer. "That sounds perfect, buddy. But let's keep the lemonade flowing first, maybe?" We both laughed, and I could feel the weight of uncertainty slipping from my shoulders like a fading shadow. Hours passed in what felt like mere moments, the cafe of imagination taking shape before us. Our pretended coffee party blossomed into a storyline unexpected yet wholly refreshing. In that playful creation, I found myself as not just an aunt but also a partner in adventure, letting go of predetermined answers and embracing openness instead. It was less about right or wrong, AITA labels, and more about connection, heart, and all the memories waiting to be made. As I tucked Lucas into bed later that night, he yawned widely, sleep creeping onto him like a gentle tide. I kissed his forehead and whispered goodnight, my heart swelling with the promise of more moments to come, both real and imagined. The warm embrace of family and joyous curiosity would forever be the backdrop to our memories, and while my inclination towards creating boundaries would always linger, I now saw clearly that love, laughter, and a big glass of playful imagination was more than enough to guide us forward. And as I slipped into my own bed that night, cozy under the covers, I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps in our imperfect, vibrant tapestry of life, there was no real asshole, only uncontrollable love, transformative moments, and the chance to share in the whimsical journey of growing up together, sip by sip, lesson by lesson. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, the sun streaming through my bedroom window determined to brush off the remnants of last night's contemplative mood. I lay there for a moment, blinking at the sunlight as it nudged me awake, and replayed the previous day's events in my mind. My thoughts flickered back to my nephew, a small whirlwind of laughter, mischief, and boundless energy that he was, and the peculiar mix of apologies and conversations that flowed between my sister and me. It was as if a gentle wave had washed over our relationship, yet another layer added to an already profound bond that had been built over years of shared stories, both poignant and silly. As I pulled on my favorite oversized sweater and ventured into the kitchen, the rich aroma of brewing coffee wafted through the air, a familiar embrace that welcomed me to the morning. I paused, contemplating how a simple morning ritual could transform into something deeper. The bubbling of the coffee machine harmonized with the soft chirping of birds just outside my window, working together to set the stage for a new day of connection. Just then, the kitchen door swung open, and in came my nephew, his hair tousled with sleep and eyes wide with excitement. "Auntie," he shouted, a huge grin stretching across his face, and I felt my heart swell. Here he was, full of potential, and I wanted nothing more than for him to know the warmth of genuine connection, even if it came with a side of caffeinated misunderstandings. We concocted a plan, a departure from our usual weekend routine. Today would be a day of adventure, designed around the imaginative whims of a 5-year-old. We decided to transform our small backyard into a coffee shop, complete with a makeshift menu scrawled on a piece of cardboard and a tea set I unearthed from the cupboard, which would serve our coffee, hot chocolate topped with whipped cream, of course. Tossing on our shoes and bursting outside, my nephew and I giggled as we pretended to grind coffee beans with theatrics, his little hands mimicking the motion dramatically as if he were an acclaimed barista. As the morning ebbed away, we turned our little shop into a flurry of activity, inviting my sister to join in on our fun. She chuckled along with us as we filled cups with chocolate, adorned with colorful sprinkles and chaotically topped with whipped cream. Each sip was a burst of joy, a testimony to the little moments that mattered so much. We served imaginary customers, took requests, and my nephew delighted in pretending to be the chief server, wearing a makeshift apron that hung like a shroud around his narrow shoulders. But amidst the laughter, I couldn't shake the thought of how easily miscommunication could stir waves of unease and overreaction, a whisper of anxiety tugging at the corners of my contentment. I watched him, absorbed in the make-believe world we created, and I realized that every moment we spent together was a lesson in understanding, his innocence reminding me of the joy and simplicity, yet also teaching me about nuances, about flaws and acceptance. If we could turn something as trivial as a glass of coffee into a heartfelt conversation about boundaries and love, then surely, we could navigate the complexities of our relationship with grace. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over our backyard makeshift cafe, I felt a wave of conclusion wash over me. Our day had unfolded organically, each moment rich with laughter and genuine connection, reinforcing the idea that there are no real assholes in this journey, just individuals growing, learning, and sometimes misstepping. I looked at my sister, who caught my eye from where she sat, a knowing smile on her lips. We shared a silent agreement: we were navigating this beautifully complicated realm of family, side by side. That evening, as the stars began to twinkle overhead, I tucked my nephew in, sharing stories from my own childhood, the ones that inspired the creation of our backyard cafe. He listened intently, his eyelids drooping as a peaceful smile graced his lips. As I kissed him goodnight, a rush of hope filled my chest. This was only the beginning. We would continue to create, to explore, and to understand one another, sip by sip, lesson by lesson, growing together in the radiant tapestry of life. And who knew? Perhaps I'd bring a larger, warmer kind of coffee into our cafe the next time, but for now, this evening was perfect just as it was. When I received the news that my older sister, Claire, had to move back in with our parents, something deep inside me told me that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't fathom at the moment. I'm Emma, the youngest of 3, and my relationship with Claire has always been a rocky one. Sure, we had shared laughter and tears growing up, but there was something about her larger-than-life persona that often overshadowed my quieter, more reserved disposition. I had built a life for myself, a snug little apartment in the heart of the city with a decent job that allowed me to pay my bills while still enjoying a few luxuries here and there. So when my parents called with concern edging their voices, explaining that Claire had been laid off and needed a place to stay temporarily, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. They explained how Claire would contribute financially to the household, which seemed reasonable on the surface, but as the weeks passed, it became disappointingly clear that this was not going to be a temporary arrangement. The first indication of the shift came one afternoon when I casually visited my parents. Walking through the familiar doorway, I was immediately engulfed in a whirl of mismatched furniture and the uniquely cluttered chaos of their living room. It felt different now. Claire had rearranged the space, filling it with scattered boxes, remnants of her previous life. She greeted me with the same beaming smile, but I could sense an underlying tension, a whisper of irritation hanging in the air like an uninvited guest. We exchanged pleasantries that felt stilted and awkward, and it quickly became apparent that her presence was overshadowing mine. It didn't take long for her to bring up the topic of finances, how my parents were struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments while trying to help her get back on her feet. It was a tough conversation that had me feeling cornered, like they expected me to take action. I found myself drowning in guilt, torn between helping my family and maintaining my own sense of independence. They mentioned how my contribution to the mortgage would ease their burdens and allow Claire more time to get a new job, framing it as a family obligation that I simply couldn't escape. After all, right? Family sticks together. The idea of throwing money their way felt like a no-brainer, but I couldn't help but wonder if Claire would truly be grateful or if she would instead see it as another opportunity to lean on me while I struggled to maintain my budding career. I mulled over it for days, and with each passing moment, the thought of participating in this financial strain more than I had anticipated grew heavier. It wasn't just my money at stake, it was my mental space, my comfort, and my sense of security that was being tested. As the weeks turned to months, the stress festered. A particularly low evening found me swirling through the darkness of my mind, battling with the anxiety of homeownership versus my sense of familial duty. Claire continued to thrive in the chaotic comfort of our parents' home, her laughter echoing through the walls while I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, feeling the distance grow. I pondered my worth in our family dynamic and felt torn between my urge to support them and my instinct to protect my own growing future. When confrontation finally loomed, it exploded into one dramatic night over a family dinner where we sat across the table, Claire alight with engaging stories from her day while I quietly picked at the cold pasta on my plate. In a moment of frustration, I voiced my feelings about not wanting to pay the mortgage. The air turned electric, and for the first time, Claire's mask slipped slightly, revealing a flicker of genuine indignation. "It's not just my responsibility," I asserted, a shaky confidence underlined by the crack in my voice. She was taken aback, and for a moment, I wondered if I had finally clarified my stance, but instead, all hell broke loose. I witnessed an explosion of accusations hurled between Claire and me, sharp words clattering like glass breaking. My parents, caught in the crossfire, tried to mediate, but I felt less like a daughter and more like a burden. Heat rose in my chest as Claire accused me of selfishness, while I voiced my feelings of unappreciation and betrayal. It was a raw, painful argument, and when it finally fizzled out, I couldn't shake off the suffocating realization that I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to the way things were, or if I wanted to. I excused myself that night, feeling more isolated than ever, and upon returning to my apartment, I fell into a deep, restless sleep, punctuated with dreams of family betrayals and financial obligations that loomed over me like dark clouds. Days blended into weeks until I finally decided to distance myself from the toxic cycle of guilt and anger. I started to think critically about my own wants and needs. I drafted a letter to my parents, outlining my decision not to contribute to the mortgage, hoping it would provide clarity for all of us. It was written with a tense love, filled with the emotional depth of someone who desperately wanted to reconnect but felt trapped by the dynamic set years ago. I explained that I loved them all dearly, but I could no longer sacrifice my own stability for their peace. The letters found their way to my parents, and although the response wasn't immediately warm, my parents at least acknowledged my courage to stand my ground. Claire, however, took it harder than I expected. Her phone call that followed was rife with anger and misunderstanding, yet I felt something shift. Instead of clashing, I allowed her to express herself while I calmly responded, and to my surprise, her tone softened. Weeks turned to months. Though our relationship didn't magically mend, it did begin to evolve towards something more honest. Claire ultimately found a new job that stabilized her income, and while it took time, we began to rebuild the bridge our family needed. I learned that sometimes, a stand for myself did not stem from selfishness but from a place of deep self-respect. That unanticipated reflection taught me the art of balance, how love can coexist with boundaries. And while the discussion of finances still hung in the air like a specter, our family unit began to resonate with a different tone, a more supportive, understanding one. I shared this story with a friend as we laughed about the ridiculousness of our familial dynamics. And the strangest thing happened. Claire popped into my thoughts, reminding me that, sometimes, the way you navigate conflict can redefine relationships, even if it feels contentious at first. As I lay in bed that night, the shadows of previous conflicts melted into the hush of my room, and I reveled in the soft glow of acceptance I felt. Maybe, in facing the storm together, we had each become stronger, more resilient. I would continue to carve my own path and embrace the complexity of love with boundaries, wrapped in the possibility of new beginnings and stronger ties. So, was I the asshole? Maybe, for a moment, but that moment helped safeguard my heart and nurture a family connection that was worth every ounce of struggle. As days turned into weeks, the dynamics at home shifted like the ebb and flow of the ocean tides, and I could feel the undertow of change swirling around me. My sister's presence had transformed the atmosphere, The house was no longer just a shell echoing with silent resentments and unspoken words, but was now filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and the occasional argument over whose turn it was to take out the trash. I caught myself glancing at her when I thought she wasn't watching, noticing the way she'd laugh at her own silly jokes or how her eyes would shimmer when she spoke about her work. I felt a flicker of warmth, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to embrace in years. I wondered if this was the unfamiliar sound of healing, an orchestra assembling after decades of discordant notes, each of us tentatively racing our instruments to join the symphony. Yet, beneath this newly woven tapestry lay a knot of tension that refused to loosen. The impending reality of our parents' financial situation loomed over us like dark clouds on the horizon. They had worked tirelessly to keep a roof over our heads, sacrificing much for a sense of security that now seemed delicate. I couldn't shake off the guilt swirling in my gut, an insistent reminder that my own independence had inadvertently contributed to the distance growing between my family and our responsibilities. We were all learning to navigate these choppy waters together, bound by a shared sense of duty, but the question echoed in my mind, was I responsible for saving us from drowning? One crisp autumn evening, as the sun began to dip below the trees, painting the sky in rich oranges and purples, I took a walk to gather my thoughts. I needed clarity. I found myself wandering to the coffee shop down the street, a cozy little place filled with the aroma of freshly brewed beans and the soft hum of conversations that somehow made my worries feel lighter. As I sipped my cappuccino, I overheard a couple discussing their struggles with family dynamics, and it struck me how universal our experiences were. That was when I realized I wasn't alone, that this shared pain, this negotiation of love and obligation, resonated beyond the walls of our family. When I returned home, a darkness was hanging in the air. My parents had decided to have the talk about their mortgage again. As they gathered us around the dining room table, I could see the worry etched into their faces, lines deepening like cracks in a porcelain vase, beautiful but fragile. They explained how the financial burden had grown heavier since my sister had moved in, how they had hoped the extra help would ease their situation, but instead it felt like an anchor dragging us all down. I could feel my heart racing, the old defenses rising up like walls starting to thicken around me again. I didn't want to fight. I wanted to connect, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. Finally, I spoke up, my voice steady but soft. What if we came together to plan this out? I want to help. The room fell silent, each of us in our thoughts, the tension a thick, almost tangible fog. My sister's eyes lit up, and for a moment, the lightness from the coffee shop danced back into the room. We frantically brainstormed ideas, pooling resources like a patchwork quilt, slowly stitching together something new. It was in that moment that I felt a compelling shift, a sturdy thread, woven through the fabric of our relationships, an undeniable connection that reminded us we were all part of the same tapestry. As the weeks passed, we fine-tuned our household budget, and while some days were harder than others, we managed to claw back the control that had slipped from our fingers. The burden didn't evaporate, but sharing it made it bearable. The night before my parents were set to meet with their mortgage lender, I found myself curled up with my sister on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us while we binge-watched our favorite show. The laughter flowed between us, and for the first time in so long, I felt free, unconfined by our past but tethered to something new and beautiful. When morning came, as the birds chirped their daily greetings, I caught an early glimpse of my parents, standing tall against the dawn, ready to face the day. They seemed more resolute, the worry less visible as they exchanged quiet words. I knew we had moved past the point of being the assholes. We hadn't just weathered the storm, we had learned to dance in the rain, to let the drops wash away our fears, and we emerged, messy, imperfect, but undeniably united. Looking back, I realized that my initial reluctance to pay the mortgage had stemmed from a place of self-preservation and misunderstanding, but it quietly evolved into an opportunity for growth. In acknowledging my boundaries, I learned the importance of balance and the strength of family, and that love isn't just about sacrifice, it's about sharing, supporting, and ultimately embracing the complex layers that knit us together. So, was I the asshole? Not anymore. Just a person learning to navigate the beautiful chaos of family ties, tangled yet stronger for the journey we shared. As for an update, life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. A couple of months later, my parents expressed their gratitude, our collective efforts had eased their burden, and they even started discussing investments in their favorite hobbies again. My sister and I grew closer, sharing our lives, guiding one another, and at times, still butting heads. Yet, each argument only served as an avenue for growth, a chapter added to our story. I think, in the quiet moments of reflection, that's the beauty of family. It's messy, sometimes frustrating, but amidst all that chaos, we often find our way back to each other. And really, isn't that what matters most? As I settled into this new rhythm of life, I noticed how the air felt different in our home. It was lighter, infused with the sense of camaraderie that had blossomed between my sister and me. On weekends, our kitchen filled with the sense of baking bread and simmering sauces, an orchestra of sound as we attempted new recipes together. But it wasn't all flour and laughter, the undercurrents of tension could still surface. I remember one particularly rainy Saturday afternoon when the sky mirrored our mood. I had returned home after a long week of work, exhausted and craving solitude. Instead, I found my sister hosting an impromptu gathering of her friends. The din of youthful laughter and music pulsed through the house, and I felt my heart thrum uneasily in my chest. I was torn between the discomfort of intrusion and the warmth of familial support in their laughter, which echoed off the walls like constant reminders of choices I didn't quite understand. Concealed within the whirlwind of my thoughts was the nagging feeling that the strides we had made had somehow become entangled with my sister's demands. As the chaos of her life spilled into our shared space, I found myself feeling suffocated by the very familial bond I had craved. When I finally mustered the courage to address it, my sister, caught off guard, was defensive. "You used to be so welcoming," she challenged, and I could sense the shadows of our past struggles creeping in. Inherently, this was a moment of vulnerability for both of us, and as the silence hung heavy before me, I realized it wasn't just about me needing space, it was also about her needing to assert her independence in this shared space. After what felt like an eternity of misunderstanding, we sat down, nursing cups of tea, the clamor of her friends fading into the background. I spoke my truth, gentle yet firm. "I love having you here, but I need a little room to breathe sometimes." I watched as her expression softened, the realization dawning on her like the morning sun breaking through the clouds. "I get it," she finally said, her voice laced with empathy. "I'm still figuring this out too." From there, we laid the groundwork for a new kind of understanding, one that delicately balanced my need for tranquility with her vibrant, chaotic energy. We established times for her gatherings, leaving pockets of silence for both introspection and connection. As months slipped by like the autumn leaves falling gently from the trees outside, our family dynamic eased into a rhythm that felt right. With the festive season approaching, my parents decided to host a holiday dinner, hoping to gather everyone, both a celebration of the many transformations we had weathered and a nod to the community we had formed. We'd always traded off holidays with each other, but this year felt different. It pulsed with undercurrents of genuine appreciation. As the table filled with food and laughter, I observed the way my sister's friends mingled effortlessly with our family, an intertwined tapestry of relationships. Each conversation brought forth stories, inherited laughter, the kind born from shared histories and new experiences alike. But amidst the joy, I saw the familiar glint of tension creeping into the room as my parents expressed worry over their lingering mortgage, a detail I had hoped to keep under wraps. My sister, well-intentioned yet impulsive, enthusiastically shared ideas for a crowdfunding initiative to help with expenses. The way my parents' glimmers with confused hesitation only added weight to the conversation. I felt the room pulse with apprehension as layers of unspoken concern layered themselves upon my heart. Stepping in, I breathed deeply, drawing from the wisdom that had built itself over months of navigating rough waters together. "Let's talk this through as a family," I suggested, knowing we could find common ground. We always had. The discussion that followed was cathartic and revealing, each family member presenting their views, fears woven seamlessly into a tapestry of resolution. Finally, we reached an understanding that eased all our hearts, an agreement to pool resources into a family fund that would alleviate some stress while allowing my parents to invest in their passions. It opened the door to a more significant discussion about finances, futures, and the shared desire to support one another. Sitting around that holiday table, the glows of fairy lights expertly littering the room flickered, mirroring the warmth in our hearts. I understood, in that moment, reassurance and growth can coexist, just as laughter and arguments can. Our journey had only begun to blossom, intricate and beautiful, revealing itself as we paid attention and cared for one another, an ever-evolving chapter filled with love. It was a moment of profound truth for me. Maybe, in allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and honest, in navigating the messy underbelly of family life, we had built something sturdier than any foundation of separate lives. We had stitched a quilt of resilience, forever learning, forever growing, bound not by blood, but by our commitment to each other. I never thought my day would take such a bizarre turn, but then again, life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It started like any other Saturday. I had decided to treat myself to a day at the local spa, a hidden gem nestled between two bustling streets, known only to locals and those who frequented hot yoga. I felt the weight of the week lifting off my shoulders as I stepped through the glass doors, the scent of lavender and eucalyptus wrapping around me like a warm blanket. After a long week of work and a slight spat with my partner, I craved a little self-love, and nothing screamed indulgence more than a day spent in soothing baths and rejuvenating treatments. When I finally made my way to the changing room, the bright lights flickered slightly, and the mirrors reflected an array of individuals, all preparing to unwind and ultimately transform into their most relaxed selves. I glanced at my watch and realized I had plenty of time before my appointment, so I took a moment to center myself, unhurried by the world outside. As I stood there, draped in my oversized robe, a wave of spontaneity washed over me. Maybe it was the tranquil ambience or perhaps the lingering frustration from the previous week that nudged me toward what I would later refer to as my confident, yet reckless moment. I could hear faint laughter and casual chatter coming from outside the changing room, the sound of people enjoying each other's company, and I suddenly felt the urge to join in on that liberation. With a mischievous smile creeping onto my face, I slowly peeled off the robe, shrugging it off as though it were nothing more than a layer of mundane responsibility. Standing fully naked in front of the grand mirror, I marveled at myself, feeling unburdened. But the moment I turned around and stepped out, my heart raced as I realized the gravity of what I was about to do. The short hallway leading toward the relaxation area was adorned with serene wall art, pieces capturing nature in beautiful, muted tones. But just as I stepped out, I heard laughter that was suddenly interrupted by sharp gasps. I froze. Standing there in my full glory, I felt the cool air wrap around me, prickling my skin and sending a flush of heat to my cheeks. In that instant, embarrassment overwhelmed me, but something deeper held me rooted to the spot, a strange exhilaration laced with vulnerability. I had expected free love in the spa community, but this was a little different. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw 3 women nearby, clad in bright, patterned bikinis and matching smiles that slowly turned into bemused expressions. One was whispering to her friends, her hand covering her mouth in playful disbelief. "Wah," one murmured, barely concealing her laughter. The tension hung thick in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. My pulse quickened. Was I about to become the subject of ridicule? A sudden wave of doubt crashed over me. I debated retreating back into the changing room, cloaking myself in that robe once again to hide from what I assumed would be a brewing storm of judgment. But the realization of what it felt like to be exposed illuminated my mind. Nakedness, in this moment, was oddly liberating. I could either succumb to the laughter and quickly shroud myself in shame, or I could own this impulsive act and confront the crowd with a light heart. With 3 deep breaths, I mustered the courage I usually reserved for bigger battles and nonchalantly strolled past them, my chin slightly raised, pretending this was just another day in my life. I heard whispers of "Is she serious? And is this a prank?" floating behind me, but instead of crumbling, it felt exhilarating. I found a corner with plush lounge chairs and settled into one, soaking up the warmth that radiated throughout the room. The whispers faded as the serene ambience seeped back in. As I reclined, a persistent thought flickered in my mind. Was I the asshole here for setting such a bizarre precedent? Or was this simply a testament to self-acceptance? Hours passed, the sun drifting just out of sight, and I eventually retreated back to the changing room, a soft smile lingering on my lips. As I slipped back into my robe, I overheard one of the women from earlier discussing their visit while I made my way back across the main hall. I couldn't quite catch their words, but snippets like "that was really brave" caught my attention, draping warmth over my prior embarrassment, transforming it into something uplifting. Back in the sanctuary of my robe, I couldn't help but reflect on those moments of unexpected bravery. Perhaps it didn't matter whether I was the asshole or the hero. In that light-hearted chaos, I had reclaimed a sense of freedom I had long forgotten, something deeper than just a physical state. It was an emotional release. Later, I found myself drafting a post titled "AITA for getting fully naked in a public changing room?" on a popular forum. I recounted the entire day, weaving in my feelings and capturing my tiny triumph nestled within an absurd situation. As I hit post, I realized that whichever way the opinions rolled, the narrative of that day would always chase me into the calmer corners of my mind, reminding me that in life, embracing vulnerability is often the truest form of strength. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, a content laugh escaped my lips when I thought how wonderfully bizarre life could be. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of lightness, a mellow nostalgia washing over me as I recalled the previous day's events. I had anticipated a barrage of judgment when I posted my story online, half expecting to be branded a social pariah for my audacious decision to strip down in a public changing room. Instead, I found myself navigating through a cascade of comments ranging from sympathetic to hilariously incredulous. People weren't just concerned about my nakedness, they shared their own stories of embarrassment, vulnerability, and the mighty human spirit that often rallies around moments of mortification. I brewed a cup of tea, the steam curling in the cool morning air, as I read through the comments. A particularly kind response struck me. Someone had remarked, "Being comfortable in your own skin is a rebellion worth celebrating." This notion anchored itself in my mind. It sparked a lingering warmth that encouraged me to shed the lingering anxieties I had faced in the past: self-doubt, the fear of being judged, and the incessant worry about societal norms. With renewed energy, I decided to take a long walk, letting the crisp autumn air fill my lungs. I meandered through the park, where the leaves danced around me in hues of yellow and orange, the sunlight filtering through the branches in a gentle, dappled embrace. I pondered what it meant to be truly comfortable, not just with my body but with my choices, every decision I had made. Each step felt liberating, almost like the last remnants of my previous anxieties were falling away with the leaves surrounding me. I stopped by a small cafe that I loved, the aroma of brewed coffee wafting through the air, intermingling with the sweetness of cinnamon pastries. As I sipped my coffee, I found myself reflecting on the connections I had formed, both online and offline, during this whimsical escapade. I felt that my experience had resonated with others, which tethered us together in a peculiar yet comforting way. Over the next few days, my post garnered even more attention, sparking long threads of laughter, solace, and the gentle reminder that we all share uncomfortable experiences, stretching beyond the boundaries of physical nakedness. I began to see vulnerability as a shared human element, one that spurred empathy and laughter. Friends would message me, recounting their own tales of embarrassment, like the time my friend Jane overshot her runway in a fashion show and fell, or when Adam, who, outside of his exterior of suave confidence, nervously tripped during his first workplace presentation, turning a simple slide into an impromptu comedy show. Each story illuminated a part of our shared human experience, and as I shared some of my own, laughter echoed across our group chats, creating an unspoken bond. These little encounters began to shape a new narrative in my life, where I felt more at ease, more present in each moment. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself less concerned about societal expectations and more focused on engaging with the world as it came. I joined a local yoga class, a decision both alarming and thrilling, pushing my comfort zone further. One evening during class, as I stood in tree pose, balancing precariously on one foot, I caught a fleeting glance of a woman across the room who was visibly struggling to find her balance. And suddenly, with an explosion of compassion, I felt an unspoken connection with her, an understanding that we were both navigating our paths through uncertainty. I smiled at her, and she smiled back, a shared moment of grace in the midst of awkwardness. As that year drew to a close, I looked back at my initial post, the snapshot of a day that seemed so trivial yet transformed into a deep personal journey. Initially, I thought I was merely sharing a funny story to lighten someone's day, but in reality, I had opened up a discussion about vulnerability and acceptance, leading to significant changes in how I viewed myself and others. I learned that my story was not just about a naked moment in a changing room but about the courage to embrace my true self, flaws and all, amidst a world that often felt all too critical. Feeling contemplative one evening, I decided to post an update on the forum, not out of obligation, but as a gentle reminder to those who had reacted to my original story. I wrote about the shifts in my life, how those reactions had inspired a newfound confidence in me and how discovering the beauty and vulnerability granted me profound connections that weave through my daily existence. As I submitted the post, a sense of satisfaction enveloped me. I had turned a single incident of discomfort into a thriving, gentle dialogue about strength and acceptance that echoed beyond my personal bubble. Life continued to be wonderfully bizarre, as it always had been, a twisted tapestry woven with laughter, vulnerability, and an unwavering belief in the power of connection, one story at a time. The following days unfolded lazily, wrapped in the glow of my newfound perspective. I found myself contemplating my previous anxieties, those little thoughts that gnawed at my self-esteem like mice in the attic. My encounters in that public changing room had spiraled into a revelation, guiding me to appreciate my body and my story without the weight of judgment. I began to notice the world around me anew. A woman in a coffee shop laughed heartily with friends while an elderly man danced with his cane to a street musician's tune. Each moment felt pregnant with life, vibrating with stories often left unsaid, and suddenly my heart felt expansive, capable of weaving connections in ways I had never considered. Encouraged by the sentiment brewing inside me, I decided to revisit the gym, the source of that awkward changing room encounter. The scent of eucalyptus wafting through the air as I entered the facility felt oddly comforting. I felt a strange sense of belonging among the machines and weights. Everyone around me was lost in their own rhythm, striving for their goals, emotionally clad as they worked on forms that were poised for twists, triumphs, and sometimes, embarrassing moments. I chuckled to myself, envisioning how I could transform any discomfort into laughter. As I moved towards the changing areas, my stomach fluttered, but not with the anxiety I had felt before. Instead, it was more akin to excitement, an anticipatory spark reminding me that uncertainty was merely a precursor to growth. In the changing room, I opted for a middle ground. I wore a bathing suit top with airy shorts rather than resorting to the bold nudity I'd displayed previously. As I slipped off my clothes, I noticed my reflection and paused. There was a freedom in shedding my anxiety like an old skin. I lifted my head a little higher, mockingly posing as if to a mirror audience, smirking at the absurdity of it all. The building's soft hum filled the space as I stepped out to face the world once again. To my surprise, I was soon greeted by warmer smiles, including a nod of recognition from a fellow gym-goer I had shared glances with in the past. Later, I basked in the pool, savoring every ripple and splash, feeling liberated by the sunlight dancing off the water's surface. Laughter echoed around me, a melodious reminder of a world that thrived on connection. I chatted with a few other swimmers, exchanging snippets of life stories, casual and straightforward, but it felt meaningful. It was that unassuming atmosphere of energy that bound us together, all of us in our own respective journeys. After what felt like hours in the sun and splashes, I returned home and opened my laptop, eager to check the reactions to my Reddit post. The responses were a vibrant tapestry of empathy, humor, and shared experiences. People opened up about their own vulnerable moments, their ridiculous mishaps, moments of embarrassment, and those flickering instances of undeniable human connection. I felt a profound sense of community enveloping me as I read through each comment. I even chuckled at a few amusing takes, like a user admitting to accidentally wearing mismatched socks for a week straight because they were too scared to ask for help. As I pondered whether I should share more of my own stories, I reflected on how small moments could birth camaraderie. So, I decided to embark on a new journey, crafting tales of awkwardness and vulnerability, blending them into reminiscent essays to share with my newfound community. I felt an invigorating kinship growing, a feeling that perhaps, by exposing our flaws, we help others feel less isolated in their own. That night, as I lay in bed, the quiet hum of the world surrounding me, I felt grateful for the vibrant narrative life presented. I nestled deeper into my covers, casting my mind back to the changing room encounter, relishing in how a single moment of embarrassment had catalyzed a wave of transformation within me. Perhaps my initial question of whether I was the asshole had been answered. It was never about the nakedness itself. In bearing my vulnerabilities, I ultimately found strength, lightened by connection, and I drifted off, smiling at the thought of the everyday absurdities and the beautifully shared experiences yet to come. I still remember the sound of my heart thumping in my chest, a primal rhythm interrupted only by the low hum of chatter from the family gathering. Christmas had always been a chaotic blend of laughter and light amidst the stress of looming responsibilities. But this year felt different, it felt heavy. My Uncle Harold was the center of attention, regaling everyone with elaborate tales of his upcoming surprise vacation to the Maldives for his daughter's Christmas gift, a trip that might as well have been a vacation of the gods. A sun-soaked getaway, oceans kissed by golden rays, while I sat a mere 10 feet away, feeling the tightening knot of resentment coiling in my stomach, the air thick with something bitter and unspoken. Just a few months back, he had borrowed $700 from me, promising to pay it back by summer, but summer had turned to fall and was now fading into winter, and here he was, talking about flopping on a beach while I was left holding the weight of unpaid debts and dwindling savings. The world outside the window streaked with winter sleet seemed a stark contrast to the sun-drenched life he was about to embark upon. I hadn't begrudged him his joy, but as he continued to expound on the grandeur of this vacation, my fingers involuntarily clenched around my glass, my knuckles turning white. I could feel the warmth of the room, the lights twinkling merrily above us, while my thoughts swirled with unease and doubt. Was I being unreasonable? Was it wrong to feel this way about family? They say money and family don't mix, and yet here I was, struggling to reconcile my love for my family with the hurt of when it felt like we were no longer on the same playing field. With every laugh and cheer from the gathered relatives, I felt the walls closing in around me, pressing on my chest until I could hardly breathe. I thought about his daughter, how this vacation would be something magical for her, a memory that would last a lifetime. But that didn't change the fact that I needed that money, too: bills, groceries, a pair of shoes that didn't have a hole worn through the sole. And then something snapped inside me, birthed from a mix of frustration and desperation. My voice broke the laughter like a sudden winter chill cutting through warm air, and I caught everyone's attention, all faces looking towards me. "Harold, can we talk about that loan?" The room fell quiet, the joyful energy draining from my words as the focus shifted from dreams of sun-soaked bliss to the heavy topic of debt. Harold looked taken aback, his expression shifting from jovial to defensive, his boastful demeanor deflating like an untied balloon. "What are you talking about?" he replied, the twinkle in his eye replaced by something darker. I could feel the weight of my words, like stones thrown into a placid lake, rippling out to the circles of family surrounding us. "The $700 you borrowed? I really need it back." There was an awkward silence, filled with muffled gasps and glances exchanged between family members, their expressions a mix of shock and, I could swear, a hint of contempt. I'd broken an unspoken convention, drawn back the curtain that shielded our family's fragile dynamics. Harold bristled, his pride wounded yet hidden behind a facade of casual irritation. "Come on, you know I'm good for it," he replied, the bravado slipping back into his tone. "This trip is for Sarah, don't make this about money now." But it was all about the money I had graciously lent him in confidence, thinking I'd be repaid before the year turned another page. I saw the embarrassment flicker in his eyes, fleeting yet sharp. I pressed on, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "I shouldn't have to feel guilty for needing what's already mine. I saved up for ages to lend it to you." The conversation dwindled into muffled complaints from Harold and whispers from the other relatives. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, unable to look away as the anger simmered beneath the surface. It felt excruciating yet liberating to have put it out there, a gaping wound laid bare that couldn't be sewn shut. In that moment, I realized the cost wasn't just material, it struck at the very heart of familial trust, turning us both into strangers fighting for something that had once been given freely. The evening wore on, and Harold eventually retreated from the conversation, a shadowy figure reclaiming the spotlight with half-hearted laughter. But I had crossed a threshold, and though the breadcrumbs of resentment might linger, I felt a strange lightness, an acknowledgement of my own needs amid the familial chaos. The unease didn't dissolve entirely, but I found peace in confronting the truth, and I experienced the beginnings of guilt dissipating, leaving space for clarity in its wake. A few days post-Christmas, I received a text from my uncle, a simple "Hey, let's get together, I'd like to clear the air." He'd agreed to pay me back in installments, starting with the first next week. I felt a rush of mixed emotions as I read the message. Relief washed over me, yes, but with it came a creeping wish that things didn't have to be difficult, ignited by the knowledge that confronting him had altered our relationship forever, shifting some foundational floorboards that would never return to their original status. I realized then, processing this new ground we stood upon, that sometimes, families could only rediscover themselves through honesty, grimy and raw as it may feel, but worth the discomfort for the sake of healing. As the weeks progressed, I found myself caught in a curious limbo. Each time my phone pinged with a message, my heart fluttered with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, anticipation for a glimpse of the man I'd once called my uncle and anxiety about what each check-in would herald. His first payment arrived promptly the following Friday. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope that bore my name, the familiar handwriting inside. It felt strange, like crossing forbidden ground, as if opening that envelope would further peel away the layers of our relationship, revealing the raw truth beneath. The moment I pulled out the check, a wave of relief surged through me, quickly followed by an echoing reminder of his promises. The feeling was bittersweet. I was grateful for the money, of course, but I couldn't shake the heaviness in my heart. That Sunday, family dinner rolled around, and with it came a palpable tension gnawing at the corners of my mind. We gathered in my parents' living room, the air thick with the scent of my mom's famous roast. Laughter bubbled up around the room as my relatives exchanged jovial stories, their raucousness contrasting sharply with my internal struggle. I could see my uncle from across the room, dapper in a sharp suit that made him look 10 years younger than his age. He was animatedly sharing plans for the trip to the Maldives, his daughter perched atop the arm of the couch, her excitement radiating. She beamed with pride, blissfully unaware of the cautious glances exchanged between her older cousins and me. Each vivid detail he described felt like a dagger to my gut. The sun-drenched beaches, the luxurious villa, the words dripped with privilege while the reality of his debt loomed heavy behind them. I swallowed hard, recalling our conversation from a few weeks back, the discomfort we'd navigated, and the truth I had dared to share. Eventually, I caught my uncle's eye. His expression shifted instantly. Gone was the carefree demeanor he wore when speaking of the Maldives. Instead, it was replaced with something akin to shame, or perhaps just a flicker of guilt. I hesitated, wondering if I should follow through with this newfound understanding between us, or allow silence to wrap around us like a thick fog. But as the evening wore on, the bravado in his words became harder to listen to. The laughter felt hollow. I clenched my jaw, trying to focus on a game of charades unfolding nearby, but inside, I was seething, a simmering pot about to boil over. Then, as if on cue, the family buzzed around, exchanging placid nods, all oblivious to the storm swirling in my mind. I stood up abruptly, meeting him halfway across the room, and as I did, time felt suspended. I couldn't fully articulate what drove me to speak, but the warmth of his laughter abruptly halted as I reached him. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above the restaurant chatter that reverberated around us. His face paled slightly as he glanced over at my parents, then nodded stiffly. We stepped into the adjacent kitchen, the cacophony of family momentarily muffled behind the door. "About the Maldives," I started, carefully measuring my words, "it's just." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be honest. "I don't understand how you can afford that when you owe me $700. There was a pregnant pause, and I could feel the air thickening between us. His eyes flickered with indignation before his shoulders slumped, exhaustion crumpling his facade. "You're right," he breathed, running a hand through his hair. The honesty in his tone caught me by surprise, a raw admission that echoed back through the familial halls we wandered. In that space, I sensed the weight of secrecy being lifted, if only slightly. As we stood there, the conversation slowly unwound, the debts, the choices he'd made, the regrets he wished he could reclaim. I saw him, not as my uncle who flaunted his apparent wealth, but as a flawed man grappling with his own decisions, navigating the murky waters of his life just as I was navigating mine. Both of us had been on different paths, yet somehow, we arrived at the same crossroads. It was hauntingly familiar. When we exited the kitchen, I felt lighter, as if the dark clouds surrounding us had drifted apart even just a little. In the weeks that followed, my uncle resumed his payments, each one a silent promise that allowed us to rebuild an invisible bridge that spanned the chasm between us. Conversations became more open, and laughter wasn't forced anymore. It returned, gradually, restoring warmth to our gatherings. Eventually, he began to involve me in his plans, allowing me to express my dreams of traveling, not to the Maldives, but to places I yearned to see, and I recognized the transformation. I understood deeply now that confronting the hard truths had not obliterated our relationship, rather, it had reformed its very foundation. As Christmas approached, I found myself wondering more and more about the nature of family, the enduring bonds that tied us to one another, for better and for worse. Something closer to understanding blossomed. Perhaps, in our raw exchanges, we were somehow rediscovering the essence of connection, imperfect yet precious. Then, one cold winter evening, as snow blanketed the streets outside and the warmth of the season settled in our home, I received another tantalizing message from him, one that read simply, "Let's plan a family trip together next year, somewhere we can all go." It felt like an invitation to venture forth into unknown territory, and to that, I found myself wholeheartedly saying yes, feeling the comfort of adventure awaiting us, perhaps captured in the warmth of honesty instead of the weight of pretense. As I read his message, a rush of excitement coursed through me, merging with the ghosts of my earlier uncertainty. The thought of a family trip was exhilarating, like the first breath of fresh air after being inside on a stuffy day. I imagined us laughing together, making new memories, and perhaps even healing some of the rifts that had widened in our conversations. I envisioned sandy beaches and lush landscapes, places where we could leave behind the heaviness of family dynamics and indulge in pure joy, if only for a while. Nestled in the corner of my living room, with the faint smell of pine wafting from our modest Christmas tree, I couldn't suppress a smile. My heart swelled at the thought of reconciliation, of letting go of past grievances and embracing what lay ahead. In the following days leading up to the holidays, our conversations took on a newfound lightness. He opened up about his life in ways I hadn't expected, his struggles at work and the weight of being the family's financial provider. It felt surreal, sharing laughter about his daughter's seemingly endless wish list while in his shadow lay the burden of the previous debts and disappointments we had navigated. I caught myself thinking about how daunting the prospect of taking my family on a shared journey had once seemed, overshadowed by prior confrontations. Yet, here we were, mapping out a future that sparkled with possibilities. As we began planning the trip, each message exchanged felt like stitches weaving the fabric of our connection tighter. We explored myriad destinations, from tropical paradises to mountain retreats. My uncle's daughter chimed in with her ideas, and so too did my siblings, each contributing their wishes and hopes for this journey. There was something wonderfully liberating about immersing ourselves in a collective dream, a shared experience that bound us together through laughter and imagination rather than the weight of expectation or disappointment. The past, with all its burdens, faded into the background for those fleeting moments, and the prospect of adventure glimmered ahead like glistening snow under the winter sun. However, as the planning intensified, I found myself grappling with another wave of emotions. The shadow of my uncle's debt lingered in the back of my mind, creeping in like a winter chill despite the warmth of our newfound camaraderie. Would I be able to fully embrace this trip, carefree and lighthearted, knowing he still owed me? A part of me wanted to push the thought aside, to submerge the nagging feeling in a tidal wave of optimism, while another urged me to confront this lingering discomfort. I reasoned with myself that perhaps this is what forgiveness looked like, the conscious choice to move forward despite unresolved tensions, to embrace joy while still holding space for the healing that needed to occur. The weeks rolled on, and soon enough, the trip was finalized. We had settled on a tropical island with golden beaches and azure waters. As Christmas approached, I felt more connected with my family than I had in years, every message imbued with the fragility and strength of our shared journey. But the night before our departure, while bustling to pack, an unexpected reminder hit me when I stumbled across a handwritten note my uncle had sent long ago, the one where he'd promised to repay the debt. It was a small piece of paper with irregular handwriting, like a phantom drifting through my memories, a promise made during a time when things felt lighter, when the looming shadow of financial stress hadn't yet clouded our interactions. In that moment, all my emotional progress felt attacked. Conflicted by the weight of my own conscience, I decided to send him a simple text, an olive branch submerged in vulnerability. I'm genuinely excited for the trip, but I can't shake the feeling about the debt. He replied instantly, let's discuss it when we're away. I want to enjoy this break with you. Deep down, I appreciated his resolve to prioritize positivity over doubt, yet the flicker of unease within me charged the air like static electricity. As we arrived at the island, every moment was filled with laughter and light, the seashells sharp against our footprints in the sand. My uncle appeared to be genuinely enjoying precious time with his daughter, capturing memories in photographs that would surely warm our hearts in years to come, while I felt the shift within myself, an acceptance of the messiness of family. Yet, the acknowledgement of debts unresolved lingered, almost like a character in its own right, standing just outside the joyous frame of our vacation. I realized then how complicated it is to straddle the line between past pain and present joy, between memories that bind us and those that wound us. On the last evening of our trip, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and lavender, I knew I had to confront my uncle once more, my heart heavy but resolution firm. We strolled along the beach, the waves caressing our ankles, making the moment feel surreal. As the sky faded to twilight, I turned to him, prepared for the delicate balance of honesty and hope I had carried from home. It's been an incredible trip, but we need to talk about some things when we return, I began, about the debt. I want us both to feel free moving forward. He looked at me, eyes reflecting the fading sun, and sighed warmly as he nodded, granting me a sense of relief as the uncertain weight began to lift. Reflecting on it, I realized there might never be a perfect time to confront issues that cling to family dynamics like sea salt in air, and while the elements of debt still hung, our shared joy illuminated so much more. In vulnerability lies freedom. Sometimes, that's where the trips of a lifetime begin. I never thought I would find myself in the midst of such chaos, but there I was, sitting on the edge of my bed before the door swung open and my best friend, Clara, rushed in, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and panic. It was a rainy Wednesday, the kind of day that makes you want to curl up with a book and forget the world outside, but today was different. Today marked 3 months since Clara's boyfriend, Ryan, had walked out, leaving her broken-hearted and desperate for answers that I had a sinking feeling she would never find. For years, I had stood by her through this tumultuous journey of love and heartache, but the truth was that I'd grown tired of her constant excuses, of the way she seemed to repeatedly brush aside her culpability in the relationship's unraveling to cling to her victim narrative. Ryan had been a good man, scrupulously faithful, But I'd watched the way Clara would flirt with him during parties, the subtle yet unmistakable invitations that would lead to late-night phone calls where she would complain about how distant he had become. I felt the weight of my own silence pressing down on me, which was why, on that rainy evening, when Clara burst into my room, I finally found the words I had been holding back for months. "Clara, can we talk?" I asked gently, hoping to soften the blow. As the words left my mouth, I felt a storm brewing within me. It was time to address the elephant in the room, no matter how much I dreaded what might unfold. Clara plopped herself onto my bed, a worn-out tear-streaked pillow held tightly against her chest as she anxiously ran her fingers through her tousled hair. "I just can't understand why he left, you know? I did everything for him," she lamented, her voice thick with helplessness. I looked into her eyes, swimming with confusion, and wondered how many times I had already fed her excuses, how many nights I had indulged her tales of woe without ever once saying what I really thought. "Maybe if you had just," I started, my voice betraying my hesitation, but she interrupted me with a wave of her hand. "What? If I had just what? Let him do whatever he wanted while I sat on the sidelines watching?" The accusation hung in the air like a heavy fog. It was then I understood I had to tread carefully. "Clara," I said slowly, choosing my words with as much care as I could. "I think if you hadn't always tried to get with him, maybe he wouldn't have left you." The moment the words spilled out, the tension crackled like electricity between us. Clara's expression morphed from hurt to outrage. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind as she struggled to process my blunt honesty. "How could you say that? You're my best friend. Aren't you supposed to support me?" I felt a wave of guilt wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by a lingering urge to defend my stance. I reminded myself that friendship sometimes required uncomfortable truths, sometimes it meant risking the bond for something more substantial. "I am supporting you, but it feels like you've never truly seen how your actions have affected your relationships. It's not just about what Ryan did, it's about us taking accountability too." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken words. Clara's gaze fell to her lap, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost her for good. It was then she looked back up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was a look of vulnerability that I had rarely seen. "Maybe you're right," she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. "Maybe I need to reevaluate how I treat the people I love." I felt an unexpected relief wash over me. Often, the hardest conversations turn out to be the most necessary. We spent the rest of the evening talking in quiet tones, not eliminating the possibility of her feelings but rather exploring them, digging into the roots of her behavior. Each shared memory seemed to stitch us back together, slowly mending the cracks that had begun to spread between us. Weeks passed, and as Clara began to explore some of her choices in therapy, I too found myself reflecting on our friendship. It became clear to me that I hadn't only been a friend to Clara, I had also held onto her anger to shield my own insecurities. I called Ryan one evening, just to check in, and surprisingly, he was open to talking. He spoke about how difficult the breakup had been for him, acknowledging the tension between the three of us. It was strange to see another person's hurt mirrored in my own thoughts. After all, hadn't all of this stemmed from a place of miscommunication? Maybe we all had a part to play in this tangled web. In the end, our friendships deepened but morphed into something new. Clara found solace in a different place of strength, and Ryan began to explore his own journey of healing. And me? I learned that sometimes addressing uncomfortable truths is a pathway to a better understanding of ourselves and the relationships we value the most. Months later, when I invited Clara to talk again, I could tell we were two friends who had survived a storm together. "You know," she said with a wistful smile. "That was a real turning point, wasn't it?" I nodded, feeling the warmth between us, the shared strength formed through honesty and confrontation, a bond that, while bruised, had somehow been made stronger. And maybe, just maybe, we would find our way back to laughter and light, as friendships are prone to do. I sat with her in that quiet moment, reflecting on how rain often gives way to the sun. The experience wasn't just about blame or regret, it was a hard lesson in growth, empathy, and the importance of holding each other accountable as we navigate this unpredictable thing called love. The silence lingered, comfortable yet heavy, as we both processed everything that had been said. I glanced out the window, noticing the rain had finally ceased. It felt like a metaphor for our turbulent conversation, a storm that had passed, leaving behind a kind of clarity. "You know," I said softly, breaking the quiet, "you might not want to hear this, but part of me is glad this happened." Her eyebrows furrowed in confusion, and I quickly added, "Not because of the pain, but because it forced us to confront the things we usually sweep under the rug." She turned to me, her expression softening as she nodded, a hint of understanding dancing in her eyes. We were two souls tangled in a web of relationships, me, the one who had tried to help her see where her actions were leading, and her, the one who had, perhaps unknowingly, steered her life into choppy waters. We spoke for hours, delving into her relationship with Jake, her boyfriend, and the heartache that had been crippling her since he left. I listened as she recounted the moments that led to their unraveling, the desperation to feel wanted battling against the impulses that drove her to seek affirmation in places it didn't belong. Every time I thought about you and Tyler laughing together, it made me feel like I was missing something, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was an admission filled with vulnerable honesty that echoed in the quiet of my living room, sinking into the spaces where judgment had dissolved. As our conversation unfolded, I realized that not only was I trying to disentangle her from her own thoughts, but perhaps also from my lingering resentment over how her actions had affected my life. Eventually, the air shifted from confrontation to appreciation, as she thanked me for pushing her to see the reality of her choices. "You saved me from myself, you know that?" she said, her voice laced with gratitude. I felt a surge of warmth at her acknowledgement, a soothing balm on the wounds that had formed from the conflict. "Sometimes you need someone to be honest with you, even if it stings," I replied, wishing she understood how difficult it had been for me to say the words I had spoken. The evening wore on, and with every moment we shared, the shadows of our past began to recede, illuminating the path before us. On a whim, I suggested we consider starting a book club together, something that had been a long-standing joke between us. The idea was met with a laugh, and just like that, we transitioned from heavy-hearted discussions to playful banter about what books we might choose. It was a brilliant revelation, the whimsical notion of stories to share and discuss drawing us back into the familiar rhythm of our friendship, leaving our deeper troubles behind, if only for a moment. As the night wore on, I felt the worry of aftermath slowly lift, maybe the storm had truly passed. I turned off the lights, wrapping us both in the cozy familiarity of warm blankets and the faint scent of chamomile tea wafting through the air. It was in those shared breaths, wrapped in comfort, laughter, and the reverberating echoes of our goodbyes to hurt, that I finally dared to hope. Perhaps building back our friendship wouldn't just be a chore, but an adventure, one step at a time. After all, every story of conflict can lead to new beginnings. When I later wrote my post on the AITA thread, I framed it not just around the tumult of those moments but also around the evolution of our bond. It truly is a testament to how love, in all its forms, can ultimately rise from the very ashes of pain. And as I hit submit, I felt a wave of catharsis wash over me, a sense of closure for what had been. The comments that followed, filled with support and shared stories, became a living testament to the resilience of relationships, no matter how strained they may become. Hours later, as I finally drifted off to sleep, I clung to the thought that even the heaviest rainstorms make way for the brightest dawns, and perhaps this new dawn was the beginning of something beautiful for both of us. As I slipped into the soft embrace of sleep, my mind swirled with hopeful visions of the days to come, where laughter would find its way back into our conversations and the lingering shadows of doubt would fade into a distant memory. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, casting delicate patterns on the floor, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I awoke with a sense of peace that seemed to linger just outside my consciousness, waiting to be acknowledged. I reached for my phone, half expecting a cascade of notifications, but found only a solitary message from Sarah, my best friend. It read simply, "Can we talk?" I could sense the apprehension in those 3 words, a quiet echo of all the unsaid apologies hanging between us. While I was eager to engage, I also felt a tightening in my chest at the thought of another difficult conversation. What would I say? Did I even know how to approach it? Taking a deep breath, I replied with a tentative, "Of course, when and where?" We decided to meet at our favorite cafe, a small, cozy place adorned with whimsical decor and the intoxicating aroma of fresh pastries. Arriving a bit early, I perched on a low stool, my heart thudding in anticipation of what would unfold. When she walked in, she appeared almost ethereal, the sunlight catching the strands of her hair, framing her face like a soft halo. Yet, beneath that radiant exterior, I recognized the shadows of uncertainty etched in her expression. She slid into the seat across from me, and we exchanged hesitant smiles, as if testing the waters after a storm. "I'm really sorry," Sarah began, her voice shaky but sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how selfish I was, and I don't know how I let it get that far." I wanted to jump in, to assure her that we would be okay, but something inside urged me to let her voice her feelings first. So, I nodded, prompting her to continue. It's just. I guess I wanted what you had, without realizing the toll it would take on our friendship. I know I hurt you, she said, her eyes glistening. There was pain in her words, a raw honesty that cut through the layers of our past. I felt something within me soften as I listened. It dawned on me just how much she had been struggling with her insecurities, having always looked up to the love I shared with my husband. You were caught in a fantasy, just as I was, I replied softly. It's hard to separate our desires from reality, and trust me, I've had my fair share of doubts. I thought things would always be perfect, but things change. We talked for hours, layers of misunderstanding peeled away like the soft petals of a spring blossom, revealing the roots of our friendship still intact beneath the surface. It felt refreshing to vent, to listen, and to empathize as we shared our past victories and losses, reinforcing how we had each found ourselves longing for something we had overlooked, the prioritization of our friendship over fleeting moments of jealousy or neglect. As time slipped by, I felt a sense of healing course through me. It wasn't just about reconciling our pasts but also about understanding the deeper roots of our connection. By the time we reached the end of our coffee, I felt as if we had created a new layer in our bond, more resilient than before. So, what now? I asked as we gathered our things, feeling light. I think we should take it slow, just focus on being us again, she mused. Let's just hang out, like we used to without any complications. I grinned, surprised at the weight that had lifted between us. We had learned a hard lesson together, one I hoped would keep us stronger and more connected moving forward. In the days that followed, we slowly began to rebuild our friendship. We went for runs by the river, where we laughed until our sides hurt, cooking together on the weekends, and even picking out movies to binge on lazy afternoons. Each gathering felt therapeutic, stitching together the frayed edges of our lives. I also saw how she began to take a step back from seeking validation in the attention of others and focused more on nourishing her self-worth. It was inspiring, and I felt grateful to witness her growth. Pain, it turned out, was not the end of our journeys but merely a pit stop on the way to something extraordinary. And with each passing day, the sunlight grew brighter, reminding me of how our lives could soften and reshape after a heavy rainstorm. As for my marriage, that too started to flourish. My husband had come to understand the weight of the situation, and we worked on cultivating stronger communication, prioritizing our bond in a way that honored its foundation. Perhaps we were all just learning how to navigate the complexities of love, friendship, and desire, an ongoing journey where every misstep could lead to enlightening perspectives. The day came when I found myself pouring out my heart again in another Reddit post, this time sharing the beautiful progress we had made, casting a brighter light on the lessons of accountability and unconditional support. We're all flawed, I wrote, but embracing each other's flaws can lead to something even more beautiful. It was cathartic, feeling the words tumble out freely, no longer burdened by resentment but buoyed by hope. As I hit submit, I looked out the window at the dawn breaking over the horizon, the colors blending seamlessly together, and for a moment, it felt like I was standing at the brink of an adventure, one built on healing and sincerity. What followed was a stream of encouraging comments and heartfelt messages from fellow Redditors who had experienced their own journeys of reconciliation, and they reminded me that the most difficult paths can lead to unexpected destinations, the small moments of joy, the laughter shared over coffee, and the deepening of true friendship. Just as I had hoped, the rain had brought forth a new dawn, and now, with each gentle wave of connection that rolled in, I understood that sometimes, the darkest storms create the most stunning landscapes. When I first moved into my college dorm, I was filled with a mix of excitement and fear. Living away from home meant newfound freedom coupled with a whole lot of responsibility, but nothing quite prepared me for becoming a reluctant pet owner. My roommate, Jamie, had a long-haired tabby cat named Oliver, a fluffy bundle of mischief that seemed to have an uncanny ability to detect when I was vulnerable, and despite my initial hesitation toward sharing my space with an animal, I found that I could tolerate Oliver's antics, until that fateful Tuesday afternoon. It had been a long day filled with back-to-back classes and a looming assignment I was struggling to tackle. I returned to our dorm, a small space cluttered with books, clothes, and the ever-present scent of takeout. The moment I settled into my bed, ready to drown out the world with some music, I heard Jamie's voice carry through the thin walls as she chatted with friends. I could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses, a stark contrast to the chaotic storm of thoughts whirling in my mind about deadlines and future plans. It wasn't long before Oliver, as if sensing my solitude, poked his head through the door, his wide yellow eyes fixed on me. "Not now, Oliver," I murmured, hoping to ward him off with my exhaustion, but, as it turns out, nothing could deter his determination. He wiggled through the slightly ajar door and hopped onto my bed, his presence filling me with a mixture of annoyance and reluctant affection. I gently shoved him off, trying to reclaim the boundaries I had set around my personal space, but I couldn't help but chuckle as he stared up at me, his ears twitching with every sound in the room. Then came the moment that seized my attention and left me questioning my sanity. Oliver, in a burst of unexpected empathy, nuzzled his face against my hand, then proceeded to bat at my fingers as if to say, "I'm really sorry for intruding, see how cute I am?" I blinked in disbelief, half wondering if I had gone mad or if this was just a cleverly plotted scheme orchestrated by my roommate. "You really think a cat can apologize?" I thought, lowering my hand hesitantly. The warmth of his fur was oddly comforting. Yet that comforting feeling quickly twisted into discomfort as Jamie burst into my room, beaming with pride for her well-behaved cat. "Do you see him apologizing?" she joked, and I couldn't help but feel a tight knot of frustration building in my chest. I had set boundaries for a reason. I needed that space to unwind, to think, and to not feel like I was babysitting a creature who had no concept of personal space. "Maybe he's learned how to be more considerate," Jamie added, but the playful tone felt dismissive of my true predicament. The following day became a cycle of Oliver seeking me out, sitting on my desk as I tried to study, performing antics to win my affection, and despite my best efforts to keep him at bay, I found myself secretly charmed. However, a tipping point came when, the next day, he curled into my lap while I was engrossed in reading. I felt warmth radiating from him, and suddenly, it felt like Oliver had transformed into an emotional semaphore, signaling that I wasn't alone despite all the chaos around me. Just as soon as the joy of that connection blossomed, the reality of our living situation crashed into it. I realized that I wasn't just fighting against a cat, I was fighting against the inklings of companionship that came with it, the roots of connection that dug deep into my reserved heart that I had not anticipated. So when Oliver came to me yet again, his head bowing slightly as he gazed with those imploring eyes as if he understood my troubles, I took a breath and softly said, "You can come in, but only this once." In that moment, there was an undeniable shift, not just between me and Oliver, but within myself as well. It felt strangely cathartic to open my door, both literally and metaphorically, allowing this little creature to occupy not just my space but also my weary heart. As days turned into weeks, I found more peace in cohabiting with Jamie and Oliver than I could have ever imagined. I started sharing moments with Oliver where his purring soothed my anxieties, moments where Jamie and I would laugh as Oliver got himself tangled in random objects in the room, and before I knew it, our space felt less like a cold dormitory and more like home. My fears of losing control over my personal space diminished, and I learned to embrace the chaos that comes with companionship. In the end, I couldn't tell if I was the asshole for trying to maintain my boundaries or if I had simply been afraid of letting someone, or something, new into my life. Perhaps some apologies, whether from a person or a cat, don't need to be spoken at all. Update: a couple of months later, Jamie and I decided to adopt a second cat. In a way, it felt as if Oliver had guided me to accept that sometimes, it's okay to let in what makes us feel alive, especially when it comes in the form of warmth, purrs, and unexpected companionship. Reflecting back on that pivotal moment with Oliver still evokes a swirl of emotions within me. I sat on my bed, surrounded by familiar comforts, the soft glow of fairy lights illuminating the corners of my room, the gentle scent of lavender wafting through the air. Everything felt just as it had for weeks, a safe, predictable cocoon. After the strange encounter with Oliver, I had decided to uphold my boundaries, uncertain yet relieved at my resolve. But as the chill of fall drifted into winter, my heart began to soften, and I noticed the joyous familiarity of my life gradually morphing into something deeper. Jamie often shared stories, enthusiastic and filled with laughter, about Oliver's antics, how he would curiously poke around the fridge or chase after the sunlight that streamed through our windows each morning. I could feel the warmth in her voice, the way Oliver brought light into our shared space, and yet, I found myself struggling with the thought of letting go of my well-guarded solitude. Days turned into weeks, and while I maintained my distance from the cat, I also began to observe him quietly from a distance. His emerald eyes held a wisdom that I could sense, almost as if he understood my hesitation but remained unbothered by it. There was something almost enchanting about how he'd stretch languidly by the warmth of the radiator, echoing the simple tranquility I craved yet feared. Slowly, I began to warm to his presence, not so much in a grand gesture, but through those small, almost negligent interactions, like when I would stand in the kitchen and catch him watching me as if waiting for an invitation into my life. It surprised me how quickly I started to miss him during those moments I chose to withdraw into my room, loathing how I had created such a divide between us with my own fears. I found myself half-consciously leaving my door ajar at night, just to catch the rhythm of his soft padding outside, an unspoken invitation for him to join me should he so choose. Finally, when Jamie suggested we adopt a second cat, a rush of emotions flared within me: fear, excitement, and a surprising sense of relief. I realized then that perhaps my self-imposed barriers had been choking me much more than any intrusion of Oliver ever could. As Jamie collected supplies and eagerly researched rescue shelters, I felt a gentle nudge toward acceptance, the idea of companionship igniting something long dormant within me. When we first met our new feline friend, a timid little bundle of gray with striking blue eyes, it felt surreal in a way that made my heart race. As Jamie gently coaxed the shy kitten forward, I felt Oliver rub against my leg, almost as if he already understood his role in this new chapter. They seemed to know what it was like to be on the fringes of solitude. Maybe, just maybe, they had both offered me a chance to be part of their world, urging me to step outside the walls I had so carefully crafted. With time and patience, the two cats became inseparable companions, and in a way, they mirrored my own journey, growth born from vulnerability. They would sprawl across my lap as I began to read or watch TV, the tiny burbles of purrs resonating with a newfound symphony of warmth. I found joy in their elegance and mischief, how they filled the spaces I had once deliberately kept empty. A few evenings later, as we settled on the couch together, I glanced at Oliver, who nestled close beside my new kitten, and it struck me clear: they offered me not just companionship but a sense of belonging, a reassurance that life was meant to be shared, even with those who might initially feel foreign. Moving forward, I learned to trust my instincts, realizing that letting in love and connection also meant unearthing parts of myself I had neglected. The warmth of their presence became my nightly solace, and as I drifted off, I understood that sometimes, the greatest apologies are those we find in the simple act of letting go, of making space for what makes us feel alive, a realization I will carry with me long into the night. As we settled into our new routine with the two cats, Oliver and our new addition, Luna, I found a sense of peace creeping into my life that I hadn't anticipated. Initially, I worried that introducing another feline into our already chaotic household might upset the delicate balance we had achieved. But Luna, with her soft black fur and mischievous eyes that sparkled with playful curiosity, helped to soothe those fears. She immediately took to Oliver, who, despite his regal demeanor, slipped into the role of doting big brother almost instinctively. Watching them wrestle and chase one another around our small apartment filled me with a joy I had almost forgotten existed. Each evening, as I snuggled under my favorite blanket, I reveled in the sound of their joyful antics, the gentle thrum of purring united in a symphony of comfort that lulled me into tranquility. Luna, with her dynamic energy, brought an unexpected vibrancy to my once quiet nights. It felt like she had unlocked something within me, something that craved interaction, warmth, and connection. I began to share my thoughts and dreams aloud, sometimes to myself while I sat on the couch, the cats curled up beside me, and I realized it wasn't just a one-sided conversation. Their feline presence felt like a mirror reflecting my own growth. I found myself questioning what other parts of my life I had unknowingly restricted with self-imposed barriers, so I began allowing friends over more often, fostering deeper relationships and inviting them into the sanctuary I had created. Jamie noticed the change, too. We laughed more, shared quiet meals where silence felt comfortable rather than suffocating. It was as if Oliver and Luna were not simply pets but ambassadors of companionship, urging me to embrace vulnerability. The change wasn't always easy. There were moments when the weight of the world would push against my chest, reminding me of past moments when I had tucked myself away. A few months in, I had what I thought was an innocuous conversation with Jamie about my feelings. I shared how I had been reflecting on why I had initially refused Oliver's well-meant apology, recounting how I now understood that love sometimes requires us to open our doors, be they metaphorical or literal, to those we fear might disturb our carefully crafted solitude. Jamie nodded thoughtfully, offering me a smile that was understanding yet tinged with sadness, and in that moment, I recognized the strength within vulnerability. It was okay to feel afraid, it was okay to be uncertain. I realize now that receiving love, whether it's from a person or a furry companion, meant stepping into the unknown, but it is also where the most profound connections could blossom. The days became less about confrontation and more about connection. About sharing our lives openly rather than behind walls built from past hurts. Then came the night that brought everything together, a night that served as a reminder of the journey I had taken since Oliver's heartfelt apology. It was a brisk winter evening, and I settled down to enjoy a quiet night with a cup of tea. The world outside was painted in white, the street lamps casting a warm glow against the snow, while inside, my 2 cats curled contentedly on my legs. I flipped open my journal, a ritual I had embraced as I gathered my thoughts, documenting the emotional clarity that had graced my life in recent months. Suddenly, Oliver leapt from my lap onto the desk, his little paws tapping against the pages until he settled beside me, staring up with those piercing green eyes as if he were reading my mind. It struck me that there was a profound sense of gratitude swelling within me, gratitude not just for Oliver and Luna but for the whole journey that had brought me to this moment. I leaned down, giving Oliver a gentle scratch behind the ears, and said aloud, "Thank you for teaching me how to love again." When Luna nudged her head against my hand, insisting on her share of affection, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection, a comforting reminder that sometimes the most precious breakthroughs come from the most unexpected places. In the blend of their fuzzy warmth and the tranquil ambience of the room, I embraced the idea that letting go of boundaries could be liberating, not just for myself but for the new family we were building together. As I closed my journal and let the stillness envelop me, I understood that life thrives in shared warmth, and perhaps, the most genuine apologies come wrapped in the soft fur of those who teach us the value of presence, love, and belonging.